At my wife's memorial supper, my daughter stood in front of 28 grieving people and announced that by Monday I would be giving up Rowan Hill Orchard because grief had made me forgetful and unsafe. She said it with my wife's pie still warm on the sideboard. She said it before anybody had even finished talking about Mara in the present tense. And while everyone in that old stone dining room went quiet in the particular way decent people do when they suddenly suspect they have walked into a private family wound, my grandson Luke reached out from under the tablecloth, gripped my wrist with both sticky hands, and whispered, "Grandpa, don't drink from the blue thermos anymore. That's when Mom says you sign things fastest. And Grandma's real letters are in the flower bin." I remember every ridiculous detail of that moment. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples hanging over the room. The rain beating against the window panes. The silver serving spoon somebody had dropped into the sweet potatoes. The way Gavin, my son-in-law, stood half a step behind my daughter Elise with his hand resting on the back of her chair like he owned grief itself. I said nothing. I did not defend myself. I did not ask my daughter if she had lost her mind. I did not ask my son-in-law why he looked more pleased than concerned. I did not answer the looks coming from the women who had taught beside my wife, the church couples who had bought apples from us every October for 20 years, the family friends who suddenly seemed unsure whether they were watching an old man being protected or stripped in public. I only looked down at Luke. He was 9 years old, hiding under linen like a boy in a fort, his eyes too wide, his voice too careful, and in that one whisper he told me more truth than the adults in that room had managed in months. Then I looked back at Elise. She was 37 and beautiful in the same exhausted way her mother used to be after canning season. Same dark brows. Same sharp chin. But the woman standing in front of the fireplace that night was not my daughter as I had known her. My daughter had once climbed orchard ladders in overalls 2 sizes too big and insisted on naming every barn cat after presidents. The woman in that room had rehearsed a speech. "Dad," she said, when I still had not answered. Her voice wavered exactly enough to sound wounded and responsible at the same time. "You know this is not cruelty. It's what's best. For the farm. For Luke. For you." That sentence landed in the room and settled there like dust. What's best? People can hide almost anything under that phrase if they say it slowly enough. I stood up. My chair scraped over old oak boards that my grandfather had salvaged from a church floor sometime in the 1950s. Nobody spoke. Even the dog under the table stopped shifting around. Gavin gave me a small, sympathetic smile. It was the kind of smile men practice for mirrors. Not warm. Not human. The smile of a man who believes the room is finally arranged the way he needs it. I looked at the blue thermos on the buffet. Mara had bought that thermos for cider tastings 3 winters ago because she was tired of disposable cups at the school fundraiser. Powder blue. Stainless cap. Slight dent near the base where Luke had once knocked it off the porch steps. It was filled with chamomile tea, Elise had said, because chamomile would help settle my nerves through the memorial supper. Then I looked back at my daughter. "Excuse me," I said. Just those 2 words. I walked out of the dining room, through the hall lined with photographs of harvests and weddings and frostbitten mornings, through the mudroom where Mara's yellow raincoat still hung on the hook because I had not yet been able to move it, and onto the back porch into the rain. Behind me I could hear the murmur start again. Not conversation. Not comfort. Assessment. People do not know what to do when a family turns on itself in front of them. So they become weather vanes. They turn whichever way truth starts blowing. Luke slipped out a minute later still clutching a folded paper napkin in one fist. He shut the porch door carefully behind him, like he had done things quietly for longer than any child should. "Mom's looking for me," he said. "All right." He held the napkin out. Inside it was a key. Small brass key. Tarnished. Flour dust in the grooves. "The pantry bin," he whispered. "Grandma told me if anything ever felt slippery, give you the key. She said slippery people hide things where they never bake." I stared at the key in my hand. "When did Grandma say that?" "Before she got really sick." That hurt in a fresh place. Luke looked over his shoulder through the rain-speckled glass of the mudroom door. "She said if Mom ever started talking like Gavin, I should listen to my stomach and not the words." For 1 second I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Because children do not invent sentences like that on their own. And my wife, even while dying, had still been building a path back to truth in case I failed to see what was in front of me. "Did Grandma tell you anything else?" I asked. Luke nodded. "She said the farm should stay alive, not just expensive." Then he frowned the way he did when trying to remember exact wording. "And she said letters belong to the people whose names are on them." "She said that twice?" I closed my hand around the key. Inside the house, somebody opened the door. I could hear Gavin's voice, low and persuasive, saying something about my blood pressure and emotional episodes. He liked words that made ordinary hurt sound clinical. "Go back in," I told Luke. His face changed immediately. Fear first. Then obedience. "Will you be mad at Mom?" I thought about the question. Not the answer I wanted to give. The truthful one. "I am already sad," I said. "That's enough for one night." He nodded and went inside. I waited another minute in the rain until the porch boards darkened completely, and the cold started getting through my shirt. Then I went back in through the pantry instead of the dining room. The pantry at Rowan Hill is older than the rest of the house by almost 60 years. Stone walls. Narrow shelves. Cool even in August. When Mara and I first married, she said the room smelled like flour and old weather. She loved it immediately. The flour bin sat under the bottom shelf, a white enamel container with black lettering half worn away. My grandmother's. Too heavy for anybody but Mara or me to move comfortably, which was probably why Elise had not thought to check it. I crouched, fit the key into the lock, and opened the lid. There they were. 5 envelopes tied with kitchen twine. 3 already slit open and retucked. 2 unopened. All addressed to me. 1 from Lydia Crane, our attorney. 1 from Adams County Community Bank. 1 from the State Agricultural Board. 2 from Mara in her own looping handwriting. For a second the room tipped. Not because of what the letters might say. Because of the simple fact of them being there. Mail hidden in flour. Truth tucked beside baking staples. My daughter had let me grieve in a house where she was intercepting my letters and dosing my tea for speed. I took the envelopes, slid them under my sweater, and stood up just as Elise entered the pantry doorway. Rain light from the porch behind her. Soft black dress. Hair pinned back too tightly. Her mother's pearl earrings in her ears. "There you are," she said too quickly. "People are worried. Dad, you can't just disappear in the middle of your own." She stopped when she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. It was almost an admirable performance. Almost. I looked at the thermos in her hand. "You tell me." Her fingers tightened on the handle. "It's tea." "I know what it is." For a second neither of us moved. Then she said, "You're overwrought." Not upset. Not hurt. Not grieving. Overwrought. That was Gavin's language, not hers. I stepped around her and went upstairs to my room. Nobody followed. Maybe they were relieved I had not caused a louder scene. Maybe Gavin told them I needed space. Maybe they were already rewriting my silence into proof that the old man was unraveling exactly as described. I did not care. I locked the bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed. Mara had died in 4 months earlier, and opened Lydia's letter first. "Caleb, I have left 2 messages with Elise because I was told you were resting. I do not feel comfortable waiting longer. The operating authorization packet you signed after your knee procedure contains page substitutions that do not match the draft you reviewed in my office. I need you to call me immediately before any transfer or collateral filing proceeds further. Further." I read the line 3 times. Then I opened the bank notice. Notice of collateral review on parcels 2B and 3A, Rowan Hill Agricultural LLC, proposed hospitality conversion loan pending signature verification and board acknowledgement. Hospitality conversion loan. I sat so still the room felt like it had gone somewhere else without me. Rowan Hill was not a hotel. It was not cabins. It was not weddings strung with fairy lights for people from Philadelphia who wanted rustic authenticity for one expensive weekend. It was apples and cider and grafting and frost alarms and school tours and pick-your-own Saturdays and a scholarship fund Mara had built from the fall festival for the public library and the high school band. The second note from Mara was shorter than the rest. If Gavin ever starts talking about unlocking hidden value, check the West Ledger, not the tasting room books. And if Elise starts protecting his tone more than your questions, slow down. She confuses loyalty with rescue when she's scared. I put the paper down and looked out the window into the black wet orchard. Mara had seen it. Maybe not all of it. But enough. Enough to leave me breadcrumbs from the grave because she no longer trusted our daughter's husband and knew I would be vulnerable after she was gone. That was the moment the memorial supper ended for me. Not when Elise humiliated me in front of 28 people. Not when Gavin smiled. When I realized my wife had died knowing she might have to keep protecting me after she was gone. My name is Caleb Rowan. I am 71 years old. I live outside Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in a stone farmhouse that my great-grandfather rebuilt after the roof fire of 1923 and my father nearly lost to debt in the late 70s before apples and stubbornness dragged it back. Rowan Hill Orchard sits on 37 acres of sloping ground with old winesap rows on the north side, younger Honeycrisp and Pink Lady blocks on the east, a cider barn by the road, and a spring house that has outlasted better men than me. In October the place smells like fermenting fruit, wet leaves, diesel from the tractors, and cinnamon from Mara's bakery kitchen. In January it smells like pruning smoke and cold iron and quiet. I grew up believing land had moods. Not mystical ones. Practical ones. A hillside tells you when it's done being patient. A rootstock tells you whether it trusts your hands. An orchard can forgive neglect for a season, maybe two, but never contempt. My father taught me that. He also taught me that people from town will call anything simple if they have never done it in the dark with frozen fingers and dead hanging over the work. Mara taught third grade for 29 years in town, and still somehow came home with enough energy to work our cash register on Saturdays, decorate pie boxes with little stamped apples at Christmas, and remember every child's name who had ever come through the farm on a field trip. She had a way of kneeling to talk to children like they were already complete people and not future versions waiting for permission to matter. That is probably why Luke listened to her. That is probably why, when things started going wrong, the truth moved toward him first. Mara died in February. Pancreatic cancer. Quick in the cruel way people always mean when they say quick about a death that actually took 9 months and all of the air out of a house. By the end she had become light in my arms. Not fragile. Never that. But light. I used to wake at 3 in the morning to make sure she was still breathing because the room had become so quiet around her. Sometimes she would open one eye and say, "If you keep staring at me like that, I'm charging rent." I would laugh because the other choice was not possible. Those last months changed the farm without anybody saying so out loud. Elise came more often. At first to help. Then to organize. Then to streamline. Gavin came too. He had married Elise 4 years earlier. Before him she had dated a carpenter who laughed too much and a firefighter who could never remember birthdays but fixed our gate without being asked. Gavin arrived in a fitted wool coat, and somehow made both previous men seem almost fictional by contrast. He worked in hospitality development, which turned out to mean he knew how to walk through old agricultural properties, point at beams and views and underused acreage, and describe profitable futures for people who mistook atmosphere for stewardship. Mara disliked him from the beginning. Not theatrically. Mara was too disciplined for theatrical dislike. But she would go strangely quiet after he left, then start wiping counters that did not need wiping. Once, during the second winter after their wedding, she asked me if I had noticed that Gavin never talked about the farm in terms of growing things. Only in terms of experiences, footprint, pricing, premium access, and destination potential. I said that was just how people talk now. Mara said, "No. That is how people talk when they do not love what a place is, only what they can skim off it." I remember saying she was being hard on him. She looked at me over the edge of a mixing bowl and said, "I'm being accurate. Hard would be allowed." She was right more often than I liked, which was one of the reasons I married her. After her diagnosis, Gavin became useful in ways that, at the time, seemed generous. He handled insurance calls when Elise was tired. He offered to modernize the online booking system for school tours and harvest tastings. He said we needed a stronger digital profile and tighter operational reporting if the farm was going to survive. The next generation transition. I did not like the phrase. But I had a bad knee, a sick wife, and a daughter who looked at me every time Gavin spoke as if to ask whether I could please, for once, make things easier instead of heavier. So I let some of it happen. That is how men like Gavin enter a life. Not with one obvious theft. With administrative help. A software subscription here. A supplier call there. A revised booking form. A suggestion about forming an LLC around the cider business. For protection. A temporary operating packet slid under your hand the same week your wife is admitted again because her numbers went sideways overnight, and the surgeon says you also need to deal with your own knee before you end up flat on your back during harvest. You tell yourself you are delegating. Sometimes you are only making room for theft to put on a clean shirt. The memorial supper was supposed to be small. That had been my request. Mara had no patience for performance mourning. She once said if she died first, and I let somebody make her into a beautiful soul, in a beige church pamphlet, she would come back just to haunt the adjectives out of me. So we held it at the house. Not a funeral. Not exactly. A supper for the people who had actually been part of her life. Her teacher friends. 2 church couples she liked. The librarian. Our neighbor from the next ridge. 3 orchard workers who had known her forever. A few cousins. Elise and Gavin and Luke. And my sister June, who brought a casserole she swore was light, and which could have insulated a barn. The weather turned wet just before dusk. A March rain. Fine and cold. The house smelled like roast chicken, yeast rolls, coffee, cinnamon, and wet wool. For an hour it was almost bearable. People told stories about Mara. How she once drove 20 minutes in a snowstorm because one of her students had left his inhaler in her classroom, and his mother did not have a car. How she corrected the mayor's grammar at a fundraiser without smiling. How she paid band uniform fees anonymously for kids whose parents had forgotten. One time too many. How she could peel an apple in one unbroken spiral while carrying on 3 conversations. I remember laughing once. A real laugh. And feeling guilty for it immediately afterward, as though laughter were a betrayal of the dead instead of proof that they had once lived properly. Then Gavin asked if he could say something. That is how the whole thing split open. He stood near the fireplace with one hand around a water glass and the posture of a man who had practiced looking reluctantly brave. Elise rose beside him before he finished the first sentence. Caleb has had a very hard winter, Gavin said. Harder than most people in this room realize. There was a little sympathetic shifting. Nods. Someone touched my shoulder. He kept going. Losing Mara was devastating. And as a family we've had to make some compassionate but necessary decisions. Family. Necessary. Compassionate. He used the words the way other men use clamps. Elise took over then, because some part of her must have known the cruelty would land softer if it came from the daughter instead of the son-in-law. She announced that by Monday I would be stepping back from orchard operations. That we had agreed the farm could no longer depend on a grieving man with memory lapses. That a sale and redevelopment arrangement would preserve Mara's legacy while ensuring Luke's future. That I had already signed the preliminary transfer package weeks earlier, and was now only being asked to let the room support me in what was a deeply painful transition. Then she said the line that made half the room stop breathing. We also won't be doing unsupervised overnight visits with Luke for a while. Not until Dad has more stability. I know Mom would want us to be responsible. That was when Luke grabbed my wrist under the tablecloth and whispered about the thermos and the flour bin. That was where the story changed. Because once a child tells you your tea is being used to hurry your signatures, there is no decent version of misunderstanding left. Only motive. Only timing. Only proof. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Mara's chair by the upstairs window until dawn with the letters spread around me and the blue thermos on the floor by my boot. I did not drink from it. I did not pour it out either. I just kept looking at the dent near the base and wondering how many cups of chamomile it had already carried to me after days when Elise urged me to rest before paperwork. At 2 in the morning I took the cap off and smelled it. Chamomile, yes. Honey. Something else. Slightly bitter. Green underneath the floral sweetness. Not enough for certainty. Plenty for suspicion. At 3 I opened the second note from Mara. Caleb. If you are reading this later than I intended, then I am sorry for the timing and not sorry for the caution. I know grief makes you generous in the worst possible administrative moments. It makes you sign to keep moving. It makes you call avoiding conflict the same thing as kindness. It makes you trust whoever sounds the most useful. So here is what I need from you if I am not there to annoy you in person. Slow down whenever Gavin speeds up. Ask to see the same paper twice. Never let Elise translate legal language when she is upset. Check the West Ledger if anybody mentions unlocking value. And if our daughter starts speaking as if your questions are harm, remember that fear makes her loyal to the nearest certainty, even when that certainty is poison. I love you. Do not turn the farm into scenery for strangers just because someone younger says the words legacy and sustainability in the same sentence. And please, for the love of God, do not let anyone call hard cider curated. Mara. I laughed when I reached the last line. Then I cried hard enough that the paper blurred. By dawn I had made 3 decisions. I was not leaving the house. I was not drinking anything Elise handed me. And before I spoke to my daughter again, I was going to call Lydia Crane. Lydia Crane answered on the second ring. Caleb, she said, and nothing else for a second, which was how I knew she was already preparing to say something I would hate. I was about to drive out there myself. I found your letter. Good. Then stop talking for a minute and listen carefully. Do you have the operating packet I sent over after your knee procedure? Probably. Elise organized most of that stack. Another silence. Of course she did, Lydia said. Find whatever copy is in your house and do not let anyone else touch it before I see it. That got my attention in a fresh way. Lydia was not dramatic by nature. She had represented our family through land disputes, easements, a labor claim in the 90s, and the trust Mara and I drew up when Luke was born. She reserved alarm for situations that had earned it. What am I looking for? Page substitutions, she said. Different footer codes. Signature pages attached to a revised authority section. I only caught it because a county filing referenced collateral powers that were not in the draft we reviewed. Collateral powers. I said the word slowly, like a man sounding out a language he thought he already spoke. Hospitality conversion, Lydia went on. Bridge financing. A transfer structure through Rowan Hill Agricultural LLC. Caleb, somebody used your signature on a packet that expanded far beyond temporary operating authority. I sat down in the upstairs hall because my legs no longer felt equal to standing. Used my signature how? That, she said, is what we are about to find out. She told me not to call Elise yet. Not to confront Gavin. Not to tell anybody outside immediate necessity that I had found the letters. Then she told me she would be at the house by 9 with coffee and a copier. At 8:30 I was in my office over the cider room pulling open every drawer Gavin had ever helped organize. Rowan Hill's office is not much to look at. Sloped ceiling. Pine desk. Filing cabinets that predate the first Bush administration. Window facing west over the oldest rows. In October the room smells like receipts, apples, cardboard, and cold dust. In March it smells like paper waiting to be handled. I found the packet in the second cabinet under seed invoices and old workers' comp forms. Temporary Operating Support Authorization. That was the title. My signature appeared at the bottom of page 5. But Lydia was right. Page 3 changed fonts halfway through the authority paragraph. Page 4 referenced asset-based borrowing thresholds, collateral review, and development exploration language I had never seen in her office. The footer code on the last page did not match the first 2. I stared at the whole thing for a long time. Then I remembered the day I signed it. 3 weeks after my knee replacement. Hydrocodone still making the edges of the day feel soft. Mara asleep upstairs after a bad nausea cycle. Elise at the kitchen table saying, "Dad, Lydia already reviewed it, this is just the clean copy." Gavin standing at the counter rinsing mugs and not speaking at all, which in hindsight should have told me he was letting Elise do the part of the manipulation most likely to succeed. At the time it felt like family helping during a week when my wife was dying and I was limping through painkillers and harvest bookkeeping. Now it felt like a precision theft performed inside grief. Lydia arrived at 9:12 carrying a cardboard tray of coffee and a portable scanner like a woman coming to perform a minor surgery. She took one look at me and said, "You didn't sleep." "No." "Good. Sleep makes people forgiving." That was Lydia too. Not warm on the surface. Reliable in the foundation. She sat up at the dining room table, pushed the pie plates aside, and started scanning everything with the efficient irritation of a person who had expected fraud but still resented being proven right. By 10:30 she had the packet spread out under 3 paperweights, and my bank notice pinned beside it with a pen. "This one is yours," she said, touching the signature page. "This one may also be yours, but not attached to what you thought you were signing. And this section," she tapped the collateral language, "was almost certainly inserted later." "How can you tell?" "Margins change. Footer codes change. Line spacing shifts. And no lawyer who likes having a license buries hospitality conversion language inside temporary operating authority without making the client sign every page." I sat across from her, hands clasped around black coffee gone cold. "Can they really sell the orchard?" "No." The speed of the answer surprised me. Then she lifted a finger. "They cannot legally transfer all of Rowan Hill the way Gavin is suggesting. But they can do a lot of damage before anyone stops them. Loans. Asset stripping. Brand transfers. Convertible development rights on parcels you do not realize are exposed. And they can absolutely tell the town a sale is happening if it gives them leverage." I looked at Mara's note again. "Do not turn the farm into scenery for strangers." "Why would Elise be part of this?" I asked. Lydia did not pretend the answer would be simple. "Because fear and marriage make people creative. Because Gavin may have convinced her this is rescue, not theft. Because she may think the orchard is failing. Because she may believe you are declining. Or because she knows exactly what he's doing and has decided being on his side feels safer than standing between you." None of those answers helped. Around 11 Wes Harlan knocked once, and let himself in through the mudroom the way he had for 23 years. Wes is 68, broad-shouldered, half-deaf in one ear from a grain dryer explosion back when Reagan was still president, and as incapable of false niceness as any man I know. He had run pruning crews with me since we were both young enough to recover from ladder falls in under a week. He looked at Lydia, the papers, my face, and said, "All right. Which part of your family lost its damn mind?" That is why I love Wes. I gave him the short version. He listened with both hands braced on the back of a chair, his jaw working slowly, then looked at the packet and said, "I always knew that polished son of a bitch walked too quietly for a man with no real work shoes." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "He may not be the only problem." Wes grunted. "No. But I'd still pay admission to see him walk into a rake." He sat down after that and told us 3 things I did not know. First, Gavin had been on the farm at odd hours more often than Elise claimed. Early mornings. Late evenings. Meeting vendors, according to him. But Wes had twice seen a black SUV from York parked behind the cider barn after closing. Second, 3 pallets of reserve cider from the West cellar had been moved out the week before Mara's memorial without any sales record Wes had seen. Gavin had said they were being repositioned for a distributor tasting. Wes had not liked it because nobody repositions reserve stock in March unless they are hiding it from inventory. Third, and this one hit harder than the others, Gavin had asked the younger crew if they would consider staying on under a reimagined event venue model once the old structure phases out. The old structure. That was me. That was apples. That was actual farming. Wes told me he had said nothing sooner because he assumed I knew. Because Gavin always acted like he was operating with my approval. Because after Mara died everybody around me had gotten too used to interpreting my silence as consent. That may have been the ugliest truth of that week. Not just that people had lied. That my grief had made it easier for them to decide not to bother me with facts. Lydia took the thermos next. She unscrewed the cap, sniffed it, frowned, and poured a little of the remaining tea into a jam jar from my canning shelf. I know a lab in Harrisburg, she said. Agricultural toxicology mostly. Pesticide contamination. Feed exposure. They owe me a favor. Wes stared at the jar. You think she drugged him? Lydia did not romanticize it. I think his grandson specifically told him he signs fastest after drinking from it. At this point I am less interested in whether the substance is technically a drug than in why a child noticed the pattern before his grandfather did. That one landed where it deserved. I left the room after that, and went out to the West Ledger room because Mara's note had mentioned it twice and I was not yet ready to sit still with my own embarrassment. The West Ledger room sounds grander than it is. It is really just a storage alcove behind the old pressing line, with shelves for handwritten production books, orchard maps, spray records, and the original scholarship binders Mara maintained in her own impossible system of color tabs and index cards. She trusted computers for weather data and payroll. She trusted paper for anything involving conscience. I found the West Ledger under 3 boxes of wax paper produce bags. Same brown leather cover as always. Mara's handwriting inside. Then mine. Then, over the last 2 years, Elise's. At first nothing looked wrong. Fertilizer entries. Bulk orders. Harvest volumes. Tasting room deposits. Then I noticed the numbering. Ledger sequence on the tasting room books jumped from W184 to W188 over one 8-week period. 4 missing inserts. Not missing pages. Missing inserts. The kind Mara used for special funds and off-cycle reconciliations. I checked the scholarship binders. Gone. Not the whole binder. Just the tabbed envelope section for the Mara Rowan Memorial Library Fund. My pulse started pounding in my throat. Mara had started that fund after the school librarian told her 2 brothers had stopped borrowing books because the overdue fines embarrassed them. Mara thought childhood shame around books was barbaric, and solved it the way she solved most things. With pie sales, raffle baskets, a lecture for the school board, and a jar at the register that turned into a yearly scholarship line. Nobody touched Mara's scholarship fund. Not because it was legally sacred. Because it was morally radioactive. The thought that Gavin might have moved even $1 from it made my vision narrow. I took the remaining ledgers back upstairs. Lydia and Wes watched me set them down. There are missing inserts, I said. And the scholarship envelope is gone. Wes swore so hard the dog barked from the mudroom. Lydia only nodded once, but it was the kind of nod that meant the next chapter of trouble had arrived exactly where she expected it to. By noon she had made 2 calls. One to the county records office. One to a forensic accountant named Mira Solis. Mira arrived at 1:30 in a navy coat with a laptop bag and the kind of still-faced people develop when numbers have shown them too much of human nature for sentiment to survive unscarred. She listened, scanned, asked for access to the bookkeeping software, and was inside the system before I had finished making coffee. There are some people whose intelligence makes a room quieter. Mira was one of them. She said little for the first 20 minutes. Just clicked, copied, compared. Then she turned the screen toward us. 3 entities sat on the page. Rowan Hill Agricultural LLC. Gallo Glass Hospitality Partners. ME Heritage Consulting. I knew the first. I had never heard of the other 2. Mira pointed. See this. Transfers labeled Development Review. Reimbursement Hold. Vendor Consulting. Heritage Access Planning. I stared. What am I looking at? You are looking, she said, at money leaving your operating account in ways that were designed to seem respectable to anybody skimming categories instead of confirming payees. How much? She did not answer immediately. She clicked twice more. Just under 84,000 over 11 months. The room went silent in a deeper way than the memorial supper had been. 84,000. That is not rounding error. That is not optimism. That is intent dressed as administration. Wes sat down hard. Where did it go? Mira tapped the second entity. Gallo Glass Hospitality Partners has a registered office in Lancaster through a forwarding service. Managing Officer Gavin Mercer Rowan. Mercer Rowan. He had fused his name into the family brand without even telling me. I laughed once. Ugly sound. Then Mira pointed to the third entity. ME Heritage Consulting appears to be controlled by Elise. Or at least signed through her email. I looked at Lydia. Then back at the screen. My daughter. Maybe she knew. Maybe she only signed because Gavin told her to. Maybe she built the whole thing with him at the kitchen table while I was upstairs helping my wife hold down soup. All three possibilities felt bad enough to break a man differently. By mid-afternoon the shape of the scheme had started to show itself. Gavin had not yet sold Rowan Hill because he could not. Not cleanly. Not fully. But he had built enough legal and financial scaffolding around my grief to make it look inevitable. Bridge transfers. Operating authority. Collateral review. Asset movement. Brand positioning. Public language about my memory. Careful suggestions that Luke needed stability. A development story ready to tell the town before the truth had time to get there first. He was not stealing a farm in one move. He was softening reality until everybody would accept that the farm had always been on its way to becoming something else. And my daughter, one way or another, had been part of the softening. At 4 Luke called from Elise's phone. His voice was too bright. Grandpa, Mom says you're resting. Are you resting? No. Oh. A pause. Then lower. Did you find the letters? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Grandma said if you ever found them, you should check the recipe box next. My throat tightened. What recipe box? The red one with the pie birds on it. In the baking cupboard. She said grown-ups never look at pretty things when they're being lied to. I closed my eyes for a second. All right. Mom says I have to go. Gavin's making dinner. Then, rushed and barely audible. Don't drink anything sweet. The line clicked dead. I stood there with the phone in my hand long enough for Lydia to take it gently away. The recipe box sat exactly where Mara always kept it. Third shelf up in the baking cupboard. Red tin. Painted ceramic pie birds along the lid. Full of handwritten cards in all her different moods. Holidays written slower. Weeknight meals written fast. Small notes in the margins that nobody else would have thought meant anything. I took it to the table and started sorting. French apple pie. Cider donuts. Onion tart. Apple butter. Ham glaze. Corn pudding. Shoofly pie from Mara's aunt. Blueberry buckle from the churchwoman Mara claimed was a menace but copied recipes from anyway. Then I saw them. Dots. Tiny pencil dots in the upper right corner of certain cards. 1 dot. 2 dots. 3. And on the back of those specific cards, under ingredients or baking notes, short lines that did not belong. Check west shelf behind 2017 maps. If Elise is translating, ask the paper. Remember parcel 3A is not sentiment, it is leverage. Do not let Gavin name anything. Library fund lives under cider and schools. Pretty plans still kill roots. Wes laughed softly when he read that last one. That sounds exactly like her. It did. Mara had been leaving herself a weapon. Maybe for me. Maybe because once she got sick she no longer trusted memory either, and wanted a trail only a person who loved her mind would think to follow. Behind the 2017 maps we found a sealed envelope. Inside was a copy of a trust instrument. Lydia read it once. Then again, slower. When she finally looked up, her face had changed. Well, she said, your wife was even less dead than I thought. What? She amended the legacy trust last October. I stared at her. We already had a trust. Yes. A fairly standard one. But this amendment carves the North Slope, Springhouse parcel, farmhouse use rights, and naming control of the Rowan Hill brand into a stewardship trust for Luke with you as lifetime steward and 2 co-trustees. Who? Lydia touched the signature block. You and Nora Vance. Nora Vance. Mara's closest friend in town. Retired county recorder. 3 years older than us. Eyes like straight pins and the spiritual warmth of a notarized deed. I blinked. Why would Mara not tell me? Lydia met my eyes. Maybe because she thought if she told you, you would tell Elise. That hurt because it was true enough to stand up on its own. The trust amendment meant one crucial thing. Gavin could posture all he liked about total transfer and redevelopment. But the legal heart of Rowan Hill was not available to him. Not without me. Not without Nora. Not without steps he clearly did not know existed. Which also meant something else. He had been moving money and building narrative around a sale he could not actually complete. That is what real thieves do when the front door won't open. They start stealing windows, hinges, and locks instead. At 6:30, Nora herself arrived carrying a grocery bag full of canned soup and opinions. She walked in, listened to Lydia summarize the day, opened the trust amendment, and said, Mara told me if Caleb ever looked genuinely confused instead of stubborn, I was to stop assuming love would fix what documentation could prevent. Then she looked at me over her glasses and added, You, my dear, have been a sentimental administrative idiot. I wanted to argue. Could not. Did not. She was right. When the truth is sharp enough, the old kindnesses between friends disappear and what remains is accuracy. That night the 5 of us sat at my table until after 10 with ledgers, transfer printouts, trust papers, recipe cards, and the blue thermos in the center like a blunt little shrine to everything I had failed to notice. Outside, rain moved through the orchard in thin silver slants. Inside, the shape of the damage kept clarifying. This was not grief gone messy. Not a worried daughter overreaching. Not a son-in-law misunderstanding rural business. This was a system. Public narrative. Private pressure. Selective sedation. Interception of mail. Diverted funds. Manufactured inevitability. By the time Nora left, she had one hand on the doorknob and one last thing to say. Caleb, tomorrow you call Elise and apologize. I stared at her. For what? For walking out. For making a scene. For being tired. For whatever she most wants to hear right now. Wes frowned. That feels wrong. Of course it feels wrong, Nora said. That's how traps start. He needs them to think he is still the man who can be hurried. Then she looked at me. Because the only way to beat people who mistake grief for weakness is to let them keep mistaking it a little longer. I did not like the idea. That usually means Nora was right. So the next morning, at 9:12, I called my daughter and told her I wanted to talk. Elise answered on the 3rd ring. Dad? She sounded wary. Not guilty. Not yet. Like a person stepping back into a room she had already arranged and wanting to know whether the furniture had moved. I should not have walked out the way I did, I said. A pause. Then the exhale I had expected. I know you're hurt. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not we handled it badly. I know you're hurt. The sentence of somebody willing to acknowledge pain as long as pain remains detached from wrongdoing. I was tired, I said. And the timing surprised me. I don't want last night to become something uglier than it already is. Another pause. Gavin said you might come around. I wrote that down later. At the time I only let it pass by. I want to understand what you think happens next, I said. That softened her immediately. Because people love explaining the future when they think you have surrendered your right to question it. By 10:30 I was at Elise's house drinking coffee I did not touch and listening to my daughter describe the planned destruction of my life as if it were an uncomfortable but elegant mercy. She and Gavin had bought a cedar-sided place on the edge of town 2 years earlier. Big kitchen island. Ship lap in the living room. Open shelves with plants that looked arranged by a person who wanted to seem casual in a magazine way. The sort of house that always feels one expensive lamp away from being staged for sale. Luke was at school. Thank God. Gavin joined us after a few minutes in a pale sweater and loafers that had never been within shouting distance of mud. He carried a folder and sat angled toward me with one ankle over the opposite knee, the universal posture of men about to explain why theft is actually strategy. "I'm glad you called," he said. "We all need to lower the temperature." Temperature. Another one of his management words. He spoke like everything human was a thermostat setting. Elise laid out their plan. A partial sale of underperforming acreage. Conversion of the cider barn into an event venue. Luxury cabins on the east parcel. Brand licensing using the Rowan Hill name. A long-term management stipend for me. A townhouse in Gettysburg. So you won't be isolated. Scheduled visitation with Luke while I stabilized. Not one word about apples. Not one word about soil. Not one word about rootstock or pollinators or the north blocks that carried our best old fruit. Nothing alive in any of it. Just margins, experience layers, guest flow, and premium positioning. I let them talk. Then I asked, "When were you planning to tell me the Orchard Scholarship Fund had started paying consultants?" Elise went very still. Gavin moved first. "That's a distortion." "Is it?" "The fund has been temporarily reallocated to development planning because long-term sustainability will actually increase charitable output." I raised a hand. He stopped. "Do not use my wife's library fund as a verb," I said. He held my gaze, then smiled slightly and leaned back. "Caleb, this is exactly the resistance Elise was worried about. You fixate on the emotional symbolism of accounts instead of the practical reality." The emotional symbolism of accounts. Mara would have thrown him out of the house for that sentence alone. I looked at Elise. "Did you know money was moved from your mother's fund?" She looked away. That was answer enough. "How much did you know?" I asked. Her voice came out thin. "I knew there were temporary reallocations. Gavin said once the development note cleared, everything would be replenished." Replenished? Like a grain bin. Like fraud became moral if you intended to put the money back after the theft served its purpose. I said, "Did you hide Lydia's letters?" That got her eyes back on mine. "Dad, did you?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at Gavin. There it was. The whole marriage in one turn of the head. "Yes," she said finally. "Because every time official mail arrived you got agitated and impossible, and Mom was sick and there was always a crisis, and we were trying to keep you from spiraling." Spiraling. More Gavin. "You hid my mail," I said. "And you thought that was care." "It was triage." Gavin cut in. I did not look at him. I kept looking at my daughter. "Elise." She started crying then. Not wildly. Just a controlled spill, the kind people like her hate because it interrupts composure without offering relief. "You don't understand what it's been like," she said. "Mom was dying. You were barely sleeping. The farm was bleeding money. Every vendor problem became a speech about loyalty and weather and the old ways. Luke was scared of your moods. And Gavin was the only person actually building a future instead of defending ruins." There are sentences that wound because they are false. And there are sentences that wound because they contain just enough truth to help a lie stand upright. Yes, I had been terrible some days. Yes, after Mara's diagnosis I became a man who talked too long and slept too little and could turn a broken irrigation line into a lecture about decline. Yes, grief had made me heavier to live around. No, that did not give my daughter the right to drug my tea, hide my mail, or help turn the farm into hospitality collateral. Gavin slid the folder across the table toward me. "Look at the projections," he said, "before you reduce all this to some sentimental accusation." I opened it. Beautiful renderings. Lanterns in the cider barn. Couples in knit sweaters under string lights. Cabins with outdoor tubs looking over rows that would no longer produce enough fruit to justify their own existence. A tasting terrace on the ridge where our best old golden russets stood. Right there in glossy print, over the image of land my father and I had fought late frosts over for 3 decades, sat the phrase. The Mara experience. I felt something cold, and almost calm move through me. Not rage. A steadier thing. The kind of clarity a man gets when the insult becomes so complete it finally strips away confusion. I shut the folder. You named a hotel package after my wife. Elise's face changed. She had not seen that line. Or if she had not understood what it would sound like when spoken aloud by the husband of the dead woman in question. Gavin recovered first. It's a legacy positioning concept. No, I said. It's theft in serif font. For one beautiful second Wes, Lydia, Nora, and Mara all seemed to be in the room with me. Gavin leaned forward. Caleb, you are not in a position to make clear long-term decisions right now. Everybody around you can see that. There was the real move. Not business. Competence. He wanted the room, every room, arranged around the idea that my grief had disqualified me from authority. How many people have you told I'm unstable? I asked. He did not blink. Only those necessary to protect the transition. Necessary again. A few more careful questions and I had enough for that morning. Not a confession. But admissions in shape if not in label. Elise hid my letters. They both knew about the fund transfer. They had already been sharing a decline narrative with third parties. And Gavin believed my authority could be replaced by a story told often enough. I stood to leave. Elise rose too. Dad, please. Don't make this uglier. We can still do this with dignity. I looked around her kitchen. At the polished counters. At Luke's backpack by the mudroom bench. At the ceramic bowl on the island full of fake pears. Dignity, I said, is not when you drug your father and unveil the sale of his wife's orchard before the memorial pie is cut. Her face went white. Gavin stood too fast. That is an outrageous accusation. Is it? He stepped toward me and stopped exactly one stride away, close enough for the citrus note of his cologne to reach me. This is what I was trying to avoid, he said quietly. You get emotional, you fill in missing pieces, and suddenly every practical decision becomes betrayal. I met his eyes. You should pray the lab says I'm wrong. His face changed then. Just a little. But enough. That was how I knew the thermos mattered. I left without touching the coffee. At noon I met Lydia and Mira at Adams County Community Bank. If there is a building designed to make a man feel smaller while also borrowing his land, it is a regional bank branch with mauve carpet and too many framed posters about trust. Sandra Hoke, the branch manager, had known Mara since PTA days and still looked at me with a rehearsed softness that made me want to leave teeth marks in the furniture. Caleb, she said, we've all been so concerned. Concern. Every predator's favorite choir. Lydia did not let her settle into the tone. We're here for copies of every filing, recording, and approval tied to Rowan Hill Agricultural LLC over the last 18 months, including any cognition-related review notes or third-party representations used to accelerate account access. Sandra blinked once. Then twice. I'm not sure I can just. You can't, Lydia said. Because my client is the primary member, because any contrary appearance is now formally disputed, and because I am very close to using the phrase elder financial exploitation in writing. People love to talk about strong women in vague admiring ways until they sit beside one who has no intention of making their day easy. Sandra took us into a back office and started printing. By the third stack my hands were numb. Interim management acknowledgement. Collateral review request. Vendor access changes. Digital authorization update. A note from Gavin requesting sensitivity in communications due to my grief-related confusion. And worst of all, a transcript summary of a video call in which I had supposedly consented to a hospitality exploration package while fatigued but lucid. I had no memory of the call. Mira checked the date. 3 days after my knee surgery. While I was on post-operative pain medication and had spent half the afternoon vomiting into a basin in our downstairs bathroom because the pills hit me harder than expected. They had put a camera in front of me that week. I remembered flashes of it. Elise saying, Dad, the bank just needs to confirm you want Gavin copied on logistics while you recover. Me nodding because my leg hurt, Mara needed medication upstairs, and logistics sounded harmless. There it was again. Not one giant lie. A series of small translated moments. The kind you only understand fully after the damage is already filed. When we left the bank, Lydia carried the printouts like ammunition. Mira drove back to her office to keep tracing payments. I sat in my truck for 15 minutes looking out at a strip mall parking lot while sleet started ticking against the windshield and trying to comprehend the humiliating scale of what had happened. It is one thing to be betrayed. Another to watch betrayal rendered in toner and staple marks. That afternoon the toxicology lab called Lydia. The tea in the thermos contained chamomile, honey, and a high enough dose of liquid diphenhydramine to produce drowsiness, slowed reaction time, and cognitive fog in an older adult. Not a knockout dose. Not poison. Nothing dramatic enough for television. Something almost worse. A practical fog. Enough to make a grieving 71-year-old sign faster. Enough to let his daughter later tell herself she had only helped him calm down. Lydia put the lab sheet on my table without comment. I read it once and could not read it again for almost an hour. Wes came by around 5 with spare keys to the equipment shed and 2 bags of bird netting he did not actually need to return that day. He took one look at my face, saw the lab report, and sat down. She really do that? Yes. He stared at the table. Then he said, Mara would have burned his car. That made me laugh despite myself. She might have. No, Wes said, almost offended. She definitely would have. Luke came over Friday for our usual after-school fishing trip by the spring pond because Elise had not yet cut that routine off and because, I think, some part of her still wanted to believe she could manage both stories at once. Loving daughter. Efficient accomplice. Protective mother. Reasonable woman married to an ambitious man. People break slower when they can keep telling themselves they are still mostly good. Luke came down the lane in his puffy coat carrying his tackle box and scanning the porch before he even reached it. Is Mom here? No. Good. 9 years old. Already relaxing only after perimeter confirmation. We went to the pond with a can of worms and sat on overturned buckets by the water while the late light turned the hills bronze and the geese made ugly sounds overhead. Luke talked about ordinary things first. Math test. A kid at school who always smelled like pickles. A frog he thought might be living under the slide. Then, while untangling his line, he said quietly, Did the tea have sleepy stuff? Yes. He nodded like that confirmed something he had already accepted. Grandma knew. What makes you say that? Because she stopped drinking anything Elise handed her in cups with lids. That stopped me. When? Near the end. She told Mom she wanted to see the tea being poured. Mom got mad and Grandma said if people are offended by simple questions, maybe they're carrying the wrong tray. That was Mara exactly. Even dying, she could still cut a lie with table manners. Luke added another detail. Gavin says old people sign better when they're grateful. I set the fishing pole down. What? He looked at the water. I heard him. He thought I was on my tablet. He said to Mom if you make Grandpa feel taken care of first, he signs faster and asks fewer mean questions. The sky over the pond went very wide and very empty for a second. Then Luke said, Grandma told me never to confuse kindness with making somebody easier to handle. There are times when the dead speak so clearly through the living that it feels less like memory and more like return. That was one of them. I asked the next question carefully. Luke, did your mom ever tell you to say I was scary? He hesitated. That alone answered too much. Only when you got loud, he said. She said if school people asked why I didn't sleep over anymore, I should say Grandpa was having a hard year. A hard year. I could almost forgive that phrase. It was the adult machinery around it I could not forgive. We caught nothing that afternoon. At dusk I drove him home and saw the black SUV Wes had mentioned parked behind the cider barn. Not at my house. At the orchard. I kept driving past Elisa's road, dropped Luke off, then circled back and parked by the lower tools shed with the lights off. 15 minutes later Gavin came out of the barn with 2 people I did not know. One woman in a camel coat and city boots. One man in a dark overcoat carrying rolled plans. Gavin stood with them under the awning and pointed across the property while talking in his animated presentation voice. They were not vendors. They were buyers. Or investors. Or the sort of people who like both words as long as no mud touches the hem of their imagination. The woman laughed at something Gavin said and turned in a slow circle, taking in the view from the upper blocks exactly the way people do when they are pricing scenery, not work. Then they all got into separate cars and left. I sat there until full dark looking at the cider barn where my wife's scholarship fund had probably helped finance renderings for strangers. By the time I got home, Nora was already in my kitchen. She had spread county maps across the table and was circling parcel lines in green ink. "Good," she said when I walked in. "You look angry instead of wounded." "I can be both." "Yes. But anger is much more useful with acreage." She had found something. Parcel 3A, the East Ridge Gavin wanted for cabins, touched an old access lane that had never been fully abandoned after the county redrew boundaries in 1988. Development there would trigger a public review. Traffic impact, watershed use, preservation objections, agricultural exemption challenges. It was not impossible. But it was messy. And Gavin hates messy, Nora said. That man wants inevitability, not process. That mattered. Because men who sell inevitability panic when reality turns procedural. By Saturday morning we had enough to stop being reactive. Not enough to go public. Not enough to go to the sheriff with confidence. But enough to do something more dangerous to Gavin. We had the outline of his dependence on smooth timing. Which meant we also had the first sketch of a way to ruin him. We would let him keep believing I was slow. Let him keep presenting. Let him keep arranging. And then we would take the ground out from under the story right when he needed it to look most settled. The deadline that mattered turned out to be Founders Lantern Night. Rowan Hill has held some version of the event for 30 years. It started small. Mason jars with candles hung from hooks. Local string quartet one year, high school jazz trio the next. Mara used it mostly to open Blossom season, thank the club members, hand over scholarship checks, and remind people that farms survive on repeated loyalty, not one glamorous weekend. Gavin had spent the last 2 years talking about elevating it. By which he meant sponsorships, city guests, private package tiers, and enough staged romance to make people forget apples were supposed to be the center of the place. This year, according to a document Mira found buried in Gavin's development folder, Founders Lantern Night was set to double as the soft announcement of Rowan Hill's transformational hospitality vision. Not public sale papers. Not yet. Something more efficient. A story. Investor energy. Local inevitability. Press photos. A founder stepping back with tears in his eyes and blessing the future. It would happen in 13 days. That same afternoon Mira came back to my house with a spreadsheet that made the whole scheme look less like ambition and more like a man running toward a cliff while trying to borrow the ground underneath him. Gallo Glass Hospitality Partners was leveraged badly. A private note from a York lender. A short maturity window. Penalty terms ugly enough to make normal people sweat. And a second obligation tied to a design firm in Baltimore that had billed Gavin for concept work, permit forecasting, and brand development at a level that told me two things at once. He had been planning this for longer than Elise realized. And he had already spent money he did not actually have. That doesn't mean he's losing, I said. Mira adjusted her glasses. No. It means he cannot afford delay. Which is better? How better? Men like Gavin survive by selling certainty. Once certainty phrase, lenders get nervous, investors get chatty, and spouses start reading the wrong documents. Spouses? I thought about Elise. Not absolved. Not innocent. But maybe not as fully informed as she believed herself to be. Then Mira showed us something else. ME Heritage Consulting had not, in fact, been built around Elise. At least not cleanly. Its original formation contact traced to a Baltimore address registered to a woman named Miranda Easton. Camel coat. City boots. The woman I had seen under the awning by the barn. Mira slid a printout toward me. Miranda Easton. Senior experiential designer. Minority Principal in Easton Vale Strategies. Easton, Nora said. M.E. I looked again. A professional headshot. Blonde hair. Poised smile. The sort of woman who looked expensive even in still images. What's her connection to Gavin? Mira turned the page. Frequent travel overlap. Shared lodging charges on reimbursed project expenses. Private dining coded as vendor development. Personal transfer sequences too round to be accidental. Lydia leaned back in her chair. Meaning? Mira's expression barely changed. Meaning if I had to bet money I would say Gavin is sleeping with his design principal and laundering trust through development language. Wes let out a long whistle. Well, he said, that marriage ought to improve things. I did not laugh. Because once the shock passed, the implication turned vicious. Gavin was not just dragging my daughter into fraud. He was doing it while building a separate future with a woman whose initials he had hidden behind Elise's supposed consulting entity. That mattered for two reasons. First, it meant the development dream he fed Elise was already rotten at its center. Second, it meant he had likely been planning life after Rowan Hill without her in a way he had never admitted. Nora saw the same turn in me. Do not tell Elise yet, she said. Why? Because right now humiliation will drive her back to him. You do not rip open the marriage until the financial spine is pinned first. I hated that too. Which again meant she was probably right. Over the next 3 days I became easier. That was the role. I called Elise once and apologized again for making things emotional. I asked Gavin if he would walk me through the Lantern Night plans because Mara had always loved that event, and I did not want my pride to damage turnout. I even let him send me revised talking points for a Founder's Remarks segment. There it was in black type on cream paper. After 30 years at Rowan Hill, I know when it is time to pass stewardship to younger hands. Rowan Hill has always been about more than apples. It has been about gathering, memory, and possibility. Mara believed in the future, and this next chapter honors her spirit. I stopped reading after that and folded the page in half. Men like Gavin always write sentiment like a permit application. Measured. Low risk. Designed to look inevitable once spoken into a microphone. He thought I was yielding. That was the point. At the same time, Wes quietly started tightening internal control. Not loudly. No accusations. Just practical shifts. Reserve cider moved under his lock. Forklift keys no longer left hanging in the barn. Inventory counts doubled. One of the younger crew, Danny, started photographing any truck that loaded after 6. We found the missing scholarship envelope on the 4th day. Not because of brilliance. Because Luke asked a question. He was in the bakery kitchen after school frosting sugar cookies with such concentration you would have thought state law depended on the sprinkles. I was boxing pies for the church women when he said, "Grandpa, why does Mom keep Grandma's school papers in the freezer?" I turned around so fast I almost dropped a pie lid. The freezer. He nodded. In the downstairs chest freezer. Under the peach slices. She said paper lasts longer cold. It was such absurd logic I might have dismissed it if the past week had not already taught me that ridiculous hiding places become reasonable inside lying households. That evening, while Elise was at a school open house and Gavin was reportedly in York for sponsor meetings, Nora went with me to their house on the pretense of dropping off Luke's backpack. She kept Luke in the front room with homework while I stepped downstairs to the utility room and lifted peach slices until my hands went numb. Under 2 freezer bags and a box of burger patties sat a white accordion file. Inside were scholarship records. Festival cash tallies. 3 thank you notes from the library board. And tucked in the back, copies of wire instructions routing donor funds into Rowan Hill Agricultural before immediate transfer out to Gallo Glass. Nora looked at the pages under the utility room light and said, "That woman has lost the right to call herself confused." It was the first time either of us said woman instead of daughter. That hurt more than I expected. I took copies and put the file back exactly as I found it. When Elise came by the farm the next morning carrying soup and guilt, I had the pages already scanned, duplicated, and sealed in Lydia's office. She found me in the lower orchard retying rabbit guards to young trees. March wind off the ridge. Mud sucking at our boots. Pruned branches stacked along the lane. She stood there in a green jacket Mara had once worn to school field days, and for one ugly second she looked so much like her mother that I had to turn away before I said something crueler than truth required. "I brought soup," she said. "Leave it in the kitchen." She waited. I kept working. Finally she said, "I know you think everything Gavin does is calculated." I drove the staple gun into a guard post harder than necessary. "I don't think that. I know it." She flinched. "Dad, I came because I'm trying." "At what?" "At not losing everybody." That made me stop. Wind moved through the bare rows. The kind of early spring wind that sounds like paper being crumpled somewhere far away. Elise folded her arms tight across herself. "You think this is simple," she said. "You think there was a clean moment where I chose him over you and that was that. But by the time Mom got sick enough that everybody started speaking in whispers, everything was already slipping. The payroll taxes. The irrigation repair. The roof on the cider barn. Your knee. Mom's treatments. You were selling cider futures in September to pay bills from July and acting like that was stewardship instead of panic. All true. Again. She kept going. Gavin came in with a plan. He showed me numbers. He showed me how close we were to losing more than you ever admitted. He said the farm needed scale or transition or both. He said the town had changed. He said we were clinging to nostalgia while the margins got thinner every year. I listened. Because there is no use pretending the farm had been easy. Mara and I had fought through 3 weather disasters in 7 years, 2 labor shortages, a bad distributor contract, and the pandemic. We were not drowning, but we were not coasting either. And when Mom got worse, Elise said, he started helping with everything. Insurance calls. Vendors. Billing. He was there. You were there too, but you were. She stopped. Say it. Cracking, she whispered. The word hung between us. I looked at her. Yes, I said. I was. She nodded, relieved I had said it for her. So when he told me the operating authority needed to happen fast, I believed him. When he said the bank needed cleaner communication because you were all over the place, I believed him. When he said hiding a few letters until after the funeral was harm reduction, I believed him. Her voice shook. And once we started, every next step was easier to call temporary. Temporary. Always that word. What about the tea? I asked. Her eyes filled immediately. It was Benadryl. Children's liquid mostly. Half capful at first. Then more when you stopped sleeping. I said nothing. Gavin said it would keep you from spiraling during paperwork. He said it was no different than helping you rest. And Luke noticed. That made her look away. I didn't think he was paying attention. Children always are, I said. That's why decent adults behave as if they are. She started crying properly then. Hands over her face. Shoulders shaking. No control left in it. And because she was still my daughter, some ruined protective instinct in me wanted to put a hand on her back. I did not. Instead, I asked the question that mattered most right then. What happens if I refuse all of it? She lowered her hands slowly. Then Gavin loses the bridge note. How bad? She laughed once through tears. Bad enough that he says we could lose the house. We. Not he. Not Gavin. We. That was how he kept her in line. Shared catastrophe. Marriage as collective hostage situation. And if the development goes through. Her voice was almost gone. Then everything stabilizes. Does it? He says it does. He also says my mail was triage. She winced. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then, very quietly, I said, Did you know about Miranda Easton? Her head snapped up. What? I watched her face because sometimes the face answers before the mouth knows what story to pick. Real confusion. Then offense. Then something like fear. No, she said. Who? I almost told her. Nora's warning stopped me. Not yet. So I said only, someone Gavin is billing as if she belongs more to this farm than she does. Elise stared at me. What does that mean? It means your husband is not the only person planning a future off Rowan Hill. She kept staring long enough that I could almost hear the first hairline crack move through whatever certainty remained in her. Then she said, if you know something, say it. Not yet. That made her angry. Good. Anger is less pliable than guilt. She wiped her face. Dad, whatever you're doing, don't blow this up just to hurt him. I looked past her to the young trees, all those guarded trunks waiting for weather they could not control. This already blew up, I said. I'm only deciding where the pieces land. She left the soup in my kitchen and drove off without hugging me. An hour later Luke called from her phone again. She's mad, he whispered. At who? All the directions. That was such a child answer and such a complete one that I almost smiled. Then he said, Gavin said the blonde lady is only business, but Mom broke a bowl. There it was. Household truth arriving in crumbs. Did he say her name? Miranda. I closed my eyes. Okay, buddy. And he said if Lantern Night goes right, then by summer things will be simple. Simple again. Did he say simple for who? A pause. Not me. I gripped the counter. What exactly did he say? Luke lowered his voice even more. He said kids get simpler at boarding school. The room went silent around me. A man can hear a lot without fully understanding what he is about to become capable of. That sentence did it. Not because I believed Gavin could ship my grandson away on a whim. Because I believed he had started imagining the child as a logistics problem instead of a boy. That changes a man's moral temperature fast. I drove straight to Lydia's office. By the time I got there, Mira had already found the last piece we needed to understand Gavin's timing. A signed venue pre-commitment with Easton Vale Strategies, contingent on founder blessing and succession narrative confirmation at Founder's Lantern Night. Meaning the event itself was collateral. My public participation mattered. My remarks mattered. My visible surrender mattered. No founder blessing, no investment release. No investment release, no bridge note stabilization. No stabilization, no Gavin. I looked at Lydia. When can we take this to the sheriff? She did not answer right away. Soon, she said. But not yet. Why? Because fraud cases like this get ugly when family starts retracting under pressure. We need admissions that cannot walk back into ambiguity. Something stronger than paper substitutions and poisonous tea. Something that shows knowing intent. Like what? Like him explaining the plan in his own words, she said. Or Elise admitting she understood more than she will currently say. Or both. That meant recording. It also meant acting weaker a little longer. I hated that. But by then hate had become a crowded room in me. I could set one more chair for patience if it bought me the right ending. So that is what we did. We invited Gavin to walk the lantern route with me at the orchard on Sunday afternoon, to make sure Mara would have approved. He showed up 10 minutes early wearing that small smile again. The one that suggested he was already rearranging the story in his head about how the old man had finally calmed down. Wes had tucked a recorder under the desk in the cider barn office. Lydia waited in town with Nora. Mira had already duplicated every relevant document 3 times. And I walked my son-in-law through the rows while asking the kind of questions he thought a beaten man asks when trying to save face. What happens to the farmhouse? What happens to Luke Summers? What happens to my staff? What happens to the scholarship fund? What happens to Elise if I move to town? What happens to the orchard workers who do not fit the new model? What happens to the North Slope? What happens to the old names? Gavin answered all of it with easy confidence. That was his mistake. Comfort. Comfort makes liars expansive. By the time we got back to the office, he had said the orchard would become a cleaner brand. That Luke would benefit from structured school years instead of all this rural emotionality. That West and 2 others were legacy labor, not future fit. That my presence would become occasional and ceremonial. That the scholarship fund would survive as a brand-facing philanthropy element. Then, in the office, while I pretended my knee hurt and sat down heavier than usual, I asked the one question that finally got him to show me the real shape of his contempt. What happens if I decide not to bless any of it? He leaned against Mara's old pie cupboard and smiled. Then we do it with more difficulty. Meaning the bank already sees the trend lines. Elise can support the transition. The town has heard enough about your bad winter to accept a compassionate handoff. And frankly, Caleb, old men do not win long games against paperwork once the room starts worrying about them. There it was. Not just fraud. Replacement. He meant to narrate me out of my own life. I asked, and Elise? He shrugged. Elise wants security. Give her that and she will call almost any bridge temporary. A husband should not talk about his wife that way. Not unless he has already converted her into process. Then he added, too casually, once the cabins are up and Luke's in the right school, everything gets simpler. I let a beat pass. Boarding school? His mouth twitched. Almost a smirk. Children from old family farms do very well with distance if they're raised into it early enough. That was enough. Maybe more than enough. I stood. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough to let him think he had won the conversation. Thank you, I said. For what? For finally saying it without a brochure around it. He frowned at that, but by then I was already opening the office door. Wes was in the loading lane pretending to fix a pallet jack. He looked at my face and knew. Sometimes men who have worked side by side long enough do not need the details first. Only the expression. He bury himself? Deep. Wes nodded once. Good. But as it turned out, Gavin was not the only one about to. Town rumor moves faster than weather if you give it the right nouns. By Tuesday morning, 3 people had already stopped me on the square to say they were sorry things were changing out at Rowan Hill. And one woman from church squeezed my arm and told me that stepping back before confusion gets worse was a sign of humility, not failure. That one nearly made me see red. Not because she meant harm. Because Gavin's story was already moving through the county on soft shoes. Old farmer. Bad winter. Memory issues. Compassionate daughter. Necessary transition. Once a story like that gets a little church around it, people stop asking questions. They start praising the people who took action. That afternoon, Lydia arranged a quiet meeting with Sheriff Tom Baird and an assistant district attorney named Valerie Chin in a side conference room at the county annex. Tom had bought apples from us since his kids were small enough to cry when the school bus passed the farm. Valerie had never met me before and looked exactly like a person who had no interest in my feelings if the evidence did not justify them. Which, honestly, I respected. We laid it all out. The substituted packet. The lab report on the thermos. The hidden mail. The trust amendment. The diverted funds. The scholarship transfers. The collateral filing. The development deck. The recording from the Orchard office. The comments about boarding school, ceremonial presents, and old men losing against paperwork. Miranda Easton. The bridge note. Everything. Tom listened with both hands folded and that grave expression small county sheriffs develop after a few decades of seeing ordinary rooms produce extraordinary damage. Valerie took notes, so fast I thought her pen might smoke. When we were done, she asked only one question. Can either Elise Rowan Mercer or Gavin Mercer Rowan plausibly say every harmful act was done for your benefit and under your consent? Lydia said. They can say it. Whether it survives contact with documents is another matter. Valerie nodded. Good. Because family exploitation cases are where bad people hide inside soft words. We need proof of knowing intent, financial motive, and reputational control. You have a lot already. I want one more clean piece if possible. What kind? I asked. The moment they stop describing this as help and start describing it as management. I almost laughed. They've been doing that all week. Yes, she said. But I want it where a jury can hear it without needing your face in the room translating the tone. So that was the shape of it. We were close. Not finished. Tom agreed to watch Lantern Night quietly if the plan held. Valerie wanted full duplication of every record. Mira kept tracing the money. And I drove home through sleep thinking how strange it is that a life can shrink down to whether strangers believe the right version of your pain. I found Elise sitting on my porch when I got back. No coat. Just Mara's green jacket pulled around her, and both hands clasped between her knees. She looked up when I stopped the truck. Her mascara was gone. Her face was flat in the way women's faces get after they have cried past vanity into something older. I know who Miranda Easton is, she said before I had even climbed the steps. So she had found out faster than I expected. How? She laughed once. No humor in it. Because your little hint sent me looking. Because Gavin forgot to clear his laptop browser. Because apparently if you build a destination future off stolen orchard money, you should not leave hotel receipts in the downloads folder. I sat down slowly beside her. The porch boards creaked. Rain ticked off the gutter. The dog pushed his head between my knees and hers like he still believed everyone in the family deserved the same weather. How long? I asked. I don't know. Long enough. Yes. She looked straight ahead. He told me she was a design consultant. Then he said she was an investor contact. Then he said you planted things because you wanted to break us before Lantern Night. Then he got angry I was reading private files and I realized I had become the kind of wife who needs permission to read the wrong man's calendar. There was no clean thing to say to that. So I said the truest one. Yes. She nodded, eyes closed. I think he was going to leave me after the launch funding cleared. I did not answer immediately because if I spoke too soon, pity would sound like absolution. Eventually I said, probably. She opened her eyes. That's all you have to say? No, I said. I also have this. Being betrayed by your husband does not erase what you did to me. Both things are true. That landed the way it needed to. She bowed her head. I know. We sat there for a while with the rain and the dog and the ruined version of family nobody in town yet understood. Then she said, Luke heard us fight. That pulled me back fully. When? An hour ago. Gavin came home, I confronted him, he lied, I pushed harder, he called me unstable, I threw a bowl, and Luke was at the stairs the whole time. I told him to go to his room and he looked at me like... She stopped and swallowed hard. Like he had already seen enough adults make rooms dangerous. I stood up. Where is he now? At home. With Gavin. That answer hit wrong in my chest immediately. You left him there. I didn't want Gavin to think I was panicking. I told him I needed air. She looked up at me. Dad, I think he's going to move faster now. I did not ask what she meant. I already knew. Men like Gavin do not respond to loss of control by becoming reflective. They accelerate. I called Tom Baird from the kitchen. He answered on the first ring. Bring the boy here, he said after I gave him the short version. Do not confront Gavin alone. I'll put a unit on the back road and keep it soft unless something spikes. By the time Elise and I got back to her house, Gavin's BMW was gone. Luke was sitting at the kitchen island in his pajamas with a bowl of cereal and the television muted. When he saw me, relief moved through his whole body so fast it looked like he had physically shrunk back into childhood. Can I sleep at the farm? He asked before anyone said hello. That was enough for me. Elise went white hearing it. Good. Some truths should hurt the parent first. Of course, I said. He nodded, got off the stool, and walked straight to the mudroom without even asking his mother. On the drive back he sat in the rear seat with both hands around his backpack straps and stared out at the dark. Then he said, Gavin said kids like me get expensive if they stay local. Elise made a sound in the passenger seat like somebody had struck her. I kept my eyes on the road. What else did he say? That you were getting harder to manage. And that summer could fix everything if people stopped being sentimental. Not emotional. Not sad. Sentimental. Gavin always used that word when he meant human inconvenience. Luke slept in the room over the kitchen that night, the one Mara used to call the pie room because the windows faced the bakery wing and the whole space smelled faintly of cinnamon no matter the season. Elise slept on the downstairs couch because she said she could not bear to leave and also did not know where else to go. I did not sleep much at all. At 1 in the morning I heard her crying through the floorboards. At 2:30 I found her in the pantry sitting on an overturned crate beside the flour bin with Mara's letters open on her lap. She looked up at me like a girl caught stealing, not a grown woman with a husband, child, mortgage, and part of a fraud scheme hanging off her life like wet laundry. She knew, Elise whispered. Yes. She knew about Gavin. Some of it. She knew about me. I looked at the paper in her hands. Mara's note about Elise translating legal language when she was upset. Fear making her loyal to the nearest certainty. Poison dressed as rescue. Yes, I said. Elise covered her mouth with one hand. I thought Mom saw me as the one who stayed. The one who was actually there. I thought she trusted me. I think she loved you, I said. Enough to leave warnings instead of wills alone. That broke her again. I didn't mean for it to go this far. No one ever means their cowardice to become architecture, I said. Then one day it does. She cried harder after that. Not because I was cruel. Because it was accurate. In the morning, before Luke woke, I told her what would happen next. You have two choices, I said at the kitchen table. You can keep trying to save Gavin and drown with him. Or you can tell the truth while there's still a version of this where Luke gets to remember at least one adult chose him over appearances. She asked the question I expected. What happens to me? I did not soften it. I don't know yet. Lydia and the county do. But what happens to you will be better if you stop lying before somebody makes you do it in a courtroom. She folded her hands so tightly her knuckles blanched. What if he destroys everything first? He can't destroy what he doesn't legally own. He can destroy reputation. Yes, I said. Which is why we're going to let him try in the room where he most wants to look untouchable. That was the first time I told Elise the outline of the revenge. Not all the mechanics. Not the sheriff placement. Not the recorders. Not the exact timing. Just the spine. We would let Lantern Night go forward. We would let Gavin believe he still had me cornered. He would invite his investors, town board people, press, and donors. He would prepare the founder transition moment he needed for his bridge lenders. And then, at the exact point he expected a blessing, I would give the room an audit instead. Elise stared at me. That will destroy him. Yes. And me. That depends on what you do before then. She closed her eyes. Dad, I don't know if I'm brave enough. I thought about that for a second. Then I said, bravery is not what you need. Shame already gave you too much stage time. What you need is accuracy. Accuracy. Mara would have approved. By noon Elise had given Lydia everything from Gavin's laptop she could access without guessing passwords. Hotel receipts. Design memos. Investor emails. A draft relocation budget that referred to her as Founder Spouse Offset. And buried in one folder named Next Phase, a proposed educational plan for Luke beginning the following autumn at St. Edmund's Boarding Academy in Vermont. No discussion with me. No discussion with Luke. No actual plan for what happens when a 9-year-old wakes up one day and discovers he has been converted into strategy. Just line items. Tuition. Transportation. Transition coach. Therapeutic correspondence period. That last phrase made Lydia swear. Even Nora, who generally treated profanity like cheap jewelry, let out one black little sentence, and then crossed herself, though she had not been Catholic in 40 years. Elise saw the document, and went completely still. I never saw that, she said. I believed her. Because betrayal changes texture when the lie stops needing you. And that document had been written for a future where Elise's consent was no longer operationally necessary. Mira found 2 more things that afternoon. First, Gavin had quietly opened a separate vendor relationship under Miranda's firm for Landscape reinterpretation. Translation: they were pricing the removal of productive rows to create view corridors for guests. Second, he had promised investors a clean succession narrative featuring a grateful founder, who would confirm that grief and age had made the sale not only reasonable but loving. Loving. That was the word that finally sharpened all my anger into something steadier. Because he did not just want the land. He wanted the morality of taking it. He wanted applause while doing it. Valerie Chin came back out to the farm late Wednesday and listened to the orchard office recording with headphones on, expression unchanged. When Gavin said old men do not win long games against paperwork once the room starts worrying about them, she took the headphones off and said, "That will do nicely for motive." Then she listened to the boarding school remark. Then to the library fund references. Then to the line about Elise calling almost any bridge temporary. She set the headphones down. "I want lantern night," she said. Lydia nodded. Tom Baird said, "We can place plain clothes and preserve the event until the trigger." Valerie looked at me. "You understand what this means. Once we move, the whole county will know. There is no discreet version." I thought about Mara's scholarship envelopes in the freezer. About Luke asking to sleep at the farm before anybody invited him. About the blue thermos on my kitchen counter. About my daughter sitting in the pantry at 2 in the morning finally reading the notes her mother had hidden because she no longer trusted the living arrangement around her. "Yes," I said. "I understand." Valerie nodded once. "Then here's what we need. We need him to make the public succession move. We need you calm. We need Elise to stay predictable and not warn him. We need the papers duplicated. We need every worker you trust positioned where they can hold the room if it gets loud. And we need one final thing." "What?" She looked toward the window where the first lantern night order forms were stacked. "We need the event to feel successful until the second it isn't. That is when men like Gavin become most honest. There are times in life when revenge stops meaning rage and starts meaning choreography. That was one of them. Thursday morning I walked the lantern route with Wes, Danny, and 2 of the older crew just like every year. Checked the hooks. Checked the path lighting. Checked the barn heaters. Counted folding chairs. Marked which section of the upper barn would hold cider club members and which would hold town officials. To anybody watching, it looked like a tired old farmer yielding to the event machine while still fussing over details because habit dies hard. That was exactly what it needed to look like. Inside, we were building a stage for the truth. And this time, unlike the memorial supper, I would know exactly when the knife was coming out. Lantern night arrived under a clear, cold sky with just enough wind to make the paper lanterns move but not enough to snuff the tea lights. Mara used to say there were only 3 kinds of event weather in Pennsylvania. Whether you feared. Whether you pretended not to fear. And whether that made liars overconfident. This was the 3rd kind. All day the farm looked almost beautiful enough to make a man forget what it was about to host. The upper lane had been swept. The barn doors stood open. Rows of lanterns hung along the path in amber and cream. Wes had the heater checks done by noon. Danny and Pete rolled barrels into place along the side wall for standing tables. The bakery kitchen smelled like cider syrup, butter, sugar, and the late batches of hand pies Mara always insisted tasted better after 6. I spent the morning doing everything exactly the way I always had. Checking chair spacing. Making sure extension cords were taped down. Moving 1 tray of cups because the volunteer girls had set them too close to the mulled cider urn. Telling the quartet where not to put their cases because that door stuck in damp weather. Habit is useful on days when your mind would otherwise splinter. Luke spent the day at Nora's house where, according to her, he colored 2 pages of tractors, ate 3 oatmeal cookies, and informed her that if adults wanted children to feel safe they should stop announcing things from fireplaces. That sounded like Mara's bloodline to me. Elise arrived at 4. She wore a navy dress and her mother's camel wool coat. No pearls tonight. No attempt to look serene. Just tired, pale, and very deliberate. Valerie had decided she would not wear a wire. Too risky. Too much pressure. Instead, she was to stay visible, predictable, and close enough to hear the founder remarks. Her part now was less about evidence, and more about refusing to rescue Gavin once the room turned. She came to the office first. Lydia was there, Nora beside her, both pretending to review silent auction forms in case anyone walked in. Wes stood at the back window looking down toward the parking area. Tom Baird and 2 plainclothes deputies were already on site disguised as a cider club couple and an equipment vendor. Valerie was due at 6:30 as a county donor in a charcoal coat. Elise shut the office door behind her and looked at all of us. "This feels like a funeral," she said. Nora, without looking up from the paperwork, replied, "It is. For illusions." Elise actually took that. Maybe because she knew she deserved worse. She turned to me. "Luke asked if he can sleep in the pie room again tomorrow. You can tell him yes." Her face folded for a second, then smoothed again. "Okay." I handed her one copy of the document I wanted her to read before the evening began. Not the scholarship records. Not the bridge note. The boarding school plan. She took one look at the heading and shut her eyes. "I keep hoping," she said quietly, "that there's a bottom. And every time I think I've reached it, there's another page." "There is a bottom," Lydia said. "Tonight." At 5:15 the first cars started rolling in. By 6 the farm was doing what Rowan Hill had always done best when the public arrived. Looking easy. The path lights glowed. The cider barn hummed. Guests laughed under lanterns. The quartet tuned softly. Children ran the lower lane until their parents dragged them back with apologies. The women from church inspected pie crusts like judges at a county fair. The bank manager came with her husband. 2 board members from the Agricultural Preservation Society showed up. The library director came in a dark shawl and carried a folder of scholarship notes, because she still thought, poor woman, that she was there to receive a donation and make a thank you speech. And, as Gavin intended, the city people came too. Miranda Easton in a camel coat and narrow-heeled boots. A man from Baltimore with a scarf tied like he was afraid of actual work. A lender type from York with watch band tan lines in the face of someone who had learned to trust projections more than weather. A local reporter from the Gettysburg paper. 3 couples I recognized from donor lists but not from any actual farm work. The sort of people who say heritage with their teeth instead of their hands. Gavin moved through them all like he had already won. Hand to elbow. Shoulder to shoulder. Small intimate nods. The exact smile for each person. He knew how to make a room feel as though it had invited itself into history when really it had bought a ticket to a pitch. More than once I caught him looking my way, measuring my posture, checking whether the old man looked pliable enough for the blessing segment. So I gave him what he wanted. A little slower on the stairs. A little quieter at the edges. A little tired in the shoulders. Never fake weakness too hard. Real predators can smell theatrics. You give them just enough reality to hook into. At 6:45 he brought Miranda over. "Caleb," he said, warm as brandy, "I'd like you to properly meet Miranda Easton. She's been invaluable in helping us imagine what Rowan Hill could become. Could become. Not what it was. Not what Mara built. Could become." Miranda extended her hand. She smelled like cedar and expensive perfume, and had the kind of face that suggested she had spent her adult life being treated as the smartest person in stylish rooms. "Mr. Rowan," she said, "it's an honor. Gavin has told me so much about your stewardship." I looked at her hand and then at Gavin. "Has he mentioned that he bills your hotel receipts through my wife's library fund?" Miranda's expression did not fully break. People like her have better reflexes than that. But the corners of her mouth hardened. Gavin let out a small laugh. "Caleb has a dark sense of humor tonight." I kept looking at her. "Do you always build guest experiences on land the owner has not legally agreed to give you?" That did it. Miranda withdrew her hand. Not offended. Assessing. Smart woman. Not good woman. But smart enough to recognize a crack in the room when she heard one. Gavin touched my elbow lightly. "There's the Caleb I know," he said. "Still theatrical when he's nervous." I moved my arm away. "Tonight is not the night to touch me." He smiled for Miranda's sake. But his eyes changed. That mattered. A few minutes later I found him by the far wall speaking low into his phone. I caught only the last part. No, he's still on script. Just sentimental. Sentimental. Always that word. At 7:10 the quartet stopped. The room settled. Cider cups lowered. Even the heater hum seemed quieter. This was the planned remarks segment. Gavin had arranged it carefully. First, a welcome from him. Then a short memorial word from Mara. Then my founder remarks. Then the announcement of Rowan Hill's next chapter, supported by renderings on the projection screen he had installed at the back of the barn. His microphone was already live when he stepped to the center under the rafters. Barn lights low. Lanterns glowing. Projector screen ready behind him. He looked right at home in my building. Good evening, everyone, he began. Thank you for being here to celebrate Rowan Hill, the community it has fed, and the extraordinary woman whose spirit still shapes every corner of this place. Mara's spirit would have slapped the mic out of his hand for that sentence alone. He kept going. He thanked donors, volunteers, our staff. Talked about continuity, resilience, memory, generational courage. It was all beautifully packaged and morally hollow. Then he invited me up. After more than 30 years guiding Rowan Hill with grit, sacrifice, and old-fashioned devotion, Caleb Rowan has graciously agreed to share a few words about legacy, transition, and the future he wants for all of us. All of us. He stepped back smiling. People clapped. I walked up carrying Mara's red recipe box. There were murmurs at that. Small ones? Confused. Curious. I set the box on the barrel podium Gavin had arranged and looked out over the room. Faces. My workers. My neighbors. The library director. Tom in plain clothes near the heaters. Valerie by the auction table. Miranda standing very still with her coat still on, which told me she did not fully trust the evening anymore. Elise by the side aisle, white as paper. Gavin smiling at me with the patience of a man indulging an old fool who has decided to bring sentiment to a business moment. I adjusted the microphone. For a second the room gave me exactly what Gavin expected. A silence ready to be filled with memory and surrender. Instead I said, my daughter announced my retirement at my wife's memorial supper before the pie was cut. You could feel the air change. Not loudly. Not yet. Just enough. I continued. She also announced that I would no longer be trusted alone with my grandson because grief had made me forgetful and unsafe. That same night my grandson told me not to drink from a blue thermos because that was when I signed things fastest. Then he gave me a key to a flower bin where my hidden mail had been kept. No one moved. Gavin's smile stayed on his face half a beat too long. Then he stepped toward me. Caleb, he said, microphone off, voice low. This is not the place. I picked up one envelope from the recipe box and held it toward the room. It became the place when a memorial supper became a business ambush. People were not just quiet now. They were listening in the awful concentrated way humans do when they realize they may be seeing the public surface of something much uglier than gossip. I opened Lydia's original letter. My attorney wrote to warn me that a packet signed while I was on post-operative pain medication had been altered after the fact to include collateral and development language I had never approved. I held up the operating packet with the marked pages Lydia had highlighted in red tabs. Those pages exist. They are copied. So are the county filings that followed. Then I lifted the jam jar from the recipe box. Inside sat a small sample of amber liquid and the lab report folded behind it. This is tea taken from the blue thermos served to me the night my daughter unveiled the sale of my wife's orchard in public. It tested positive for a sedating dose of diphenhydramine sufficient to cause cognitive fog and slow judgment in an older adult. The room made a sound then. Not one sound. Many. Inhalations. A chair scrape. Somebody whispering Jesus. Somebody else saying no under their breath. Elise had one hand over her mouth. Not acting now. Just shattered. Gavin moved again. We need to pause, he said louder. Caleb is emotional and... I turned toward Danny in the sound booth corner. Projection 1. Danny, 19 years old and more loyal than most blood relatives, hit the switch. The screen behind us lit up. Not with renderings. With transfers. Rows of figures Mira had formatted cleanly enough for even the city people to understand. Dates. Amounts. Accounts. Scholarship fund redirections. Gallo Glass payments. ME Heritage Consulting. Hotel receipts. Consulting reimbursements. Bridge note obligations. Gasps hit the barn in uneven pockets. Gavin actually stepped back. Miranda did not gasp. She went still in the exact way dangerous professionals do when deciding whether to separate themselves from a man faster than the law can. I kept going. My wife, Mara Rowan, suspected something before she died. She hid notes in her recipe box because she no longer trusted the adults around her. She amended the family trust so that the core land and the Rowan Hill name could not be converted into somebody else's hospitality project without the consent of people who actually understood what the farm was. Nora stepped into the light then, trust amendment in hand. I am one of those co-trustees, she said. For the record, no such consent has been given. The proposed transition platform being represented tonight has no authority under the trust. That hit the lender type from York. I watched him go pale from 30 feet away. Beautiful. Gavin's voice sharpened. This is absurd. Caleb is misrepresenting temporary planning documents because he cannot cope with succession. I nodded toward Wes. Audio. Wes tapped his phone to the mixer. A moment later Gavin's own voice rolled through the barn speakers. Old men do not win long games against paperwork once the room starts worrying about them. A rustle moved through the room like dry leaves. Then, Elise wants security. Give her that, and she will call almost any bridge temporary. And children from old family farms do very well with distance if they're raised into it early enough. That one landed hardest. Because even people willing to tolerate financial ugliness still dislike hearing a child spoken about like a shipping option. I watched faces shift. The library director. The church women. The preservation board men. The reporter with his pen out now. The bank manager looking like she wanted to sink through the floor. Miranda with her arms crossed and no more illusions about keeping her coat clean. Gavin went for the only ground he thought still available. Recorded selectively, he snapped. Taken out of context. This is a private family dispute being staged to protect an obsolete business model. I opened the recipe box again. That would be more persuasive, I said, if you had not billed your private hotel meetings with Miranda Easton through a shell entity tied to my operating account. Projection 2. The screen changed to receipts. Travel overlaps. ME Heritage Formation. Miranda's address. The Easton Vale vendor invoices. This time the sound in the room was not surprise. It was disgust. Miranda took one single step away from Gavin. Not much. Enough. And because fate occasionally still has humor, the local reporter captured that exact second. I heard the shudder burst from the back. Gavin turned toward her. Don't, he said. Too late. Then Elise moved. Not toward him. Toward me. She held a paper in her shaking hand. The boarding school plan. Her voice was ragged but clear when she spoke into the second microphone on the side stand. This, she said, was in Gavin's files. It's a plan to send Luke to boarding school in Vermont next fall without discussing it with me or my father. It lists me as a spouse offset and assumes founder transition will already be complete. The room reacted again. Because betrayal is ugly. But motherhood punctured in public is a special kind of ugliness. People feel the line there even when they have tolerated too much before it. Elisa's eyes met mine only once. Not seeking rescue. Offering truth. I hid my father's letters, she said to the room. I told myself it was temporary. I helped move money I told myself would go back. I let Gavin convince me that speed was care and control was stability. I was wrong. That is on me. But this plan was never about protecting my father. It was about stripping the farm before anybody strong enough to stop him woke up. Gavin stared at her like a man watching a bridge detach from the road while he is still halfway across it. Then, because he was Gavin, he went furious instead of ashamed. "You stupid," he started, and stopped only because Tom Baird stepped into the aisle and said, "Careful." Just one word. Steady. Public. That changed everything. Not because Tom was theatrical. Because he was visible. Valerie Chin appeared beside the raffle table then, badge already in hand. "Gavin Mercer Rowan," she said, voice carrying clean through the barn. "I am advising you not to leave. This county has probable cause to charge financial fraud, elder exploitation, unauthorized administration of sedatives, and theft related to charitable funds. Additional charges may follow." For a second nobody moved. Then Gavin laughed. Actually laughed. Short, disbelieving, ugly. "This is insane. Elise, tell them. Tell them your father has been deteriorating for months. Tell them he's manipulative. Tell them he uses grief when numbers corner him." Elise did not look at him. That was the end. He saw it too. The room, the investors, the town people, the lender, the design woman, the board members, the reporter, the workers, the bank manager, my daughter, the sheriff. None of them were holding the old story up for him anymore. So he tried the only thing left. He reached for the recipe box. Fast. Dumb. Instinctive. Maybe to knock it over. Maybe to grab the papers. Maybe just to make movement where stillness was killing him. Tom and the deputies were on him before he got 3 steps. It was not graceful. Good. The barrel podium tipped. Lantern light jumped. People shouted. One of the church women screamed. Miranda backed into a cider barrel so hard it rolled. Gavin twisted once under Tom's grip and actually shouted my name like accusation. "Caleb." "Not sir. Not Mr. Rowan. Not father-in-law. Just my name, raw and furious, as though I had somehow violated an agreement that only existed in his own head." Tom got his arm behind his back. The deputy took the other side. Metal clicked. Handcuffs sound smaller in real life than in movies. That bothered me at the time. Such a small sound for such a large wreckage. Valerie turned to the room before the shock could dissolve into rumor. "For anyone present," she said, "you may be contacted as witnesses. Please do not leave until a deputy has your name if you were within hearing range of the statements made tonight. Mr. Rowan's operating records, charitable funds, and family trust are under protective review effective immediately." Protective review. That was good language. Useful language. Language pointed the right direction for once. Gavin kept talking. Too fast now. No strategy left. Fragments. She knew. Everybody knew. This farm was dying anyway. Old men ruin land by refusing change. You people don't understand what scaling takes. He would have paid it all back. It was never going to hurt the kid. Everybody uses Benadryl. Everybody. Everybody. That is the music selfish men make when the room stops agreeing to be their mirror. One deputy walked him toward the side doors. The reporter followed at a careful distance. Tom held the line of the room. Valerie was already asking for the lender and bank manager by name. And I stood there with Mara's recipe box in both hands thinking, this is what he thought he would take from us and rename. The library director came to stand beside me. She was 72, wore bifocals on a chain, and had known Mara since their first year teaching. Her voice shook when she said, "He used her scholarship fund." "Yes." She touched the lid of the recipe box once with 2 fingers, almost like a blessing. She would hate that he called it legacy. She would, I said. The room did not settle quickly. Too many people. Too much confusion. Too much abrupt contact between donor coats and criminal process. Wes and Danny, God bless them, moved like fire crew. Righted the barrel podium. Cut the mics. Told the quartet to wait. Redirected volunteers. Kept people from crowding Elise. kept people from crowding me, made coffee for the women who had started shaking, brought water to the bank manager who looked like she might actually faint. Nora took the lender from York into the side office with Lydia and shut the door. Later Lydia would tell me that she put the trust amendment, the collateral dispute, and the fraud timeline in front of him and said, very gently, that if he wanted to avoid being introduced in tomorrow's paper as the man who financed an elder exploitation scheme through a library scholarship fund, he should think carefully about how cooperative his institution intended to be. Apparently he thought carefully very fast. Miranda tried to leave quietly. Valerie stopped her. Not with cuffs. Not yet. Just with paperwork and the face of a woman who knew exactly how many design consultants turn into co-conspirators once the emails are printed in the right font size. Miranda's expression was the coolest thing in the barn, and still I could see fear beginning under it. Not fear for me. Not fear for Luke. Fear for Miranda. I did not pity her. Elise sat down finally on a hay bale near the side wall and put both hands over her face. I went to her after a while because whether I liked it or not, she was still my daughter, and there are some collapses a father recognizes on sight even when he cannot yet offer comfort. She looked up at me. Is Luke okay? Yes. He doesn't know. Not all of it. She nodded. Tears on her chin now. No elegance left in them. I keep thinking if I had just asked one stubborn question earlier. Yes, I said. Me too. That was our first honest exchange in months. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But truth stripped enough to fit in one sentence. After the deputies took names and statements, and the reporter had what he needed, and the first wave of guests finally drifted out into the cold looking smaller than when they arrived, Wes asked me what I wanted to do about the rest of the event. It was nearly 9:30 by then. Half the pies untouched. Half the lanterns still burning. A barn full of rattled people standing in the ruins of a pitch deck. I looked at the scholarship folder in the recipe box. Then at the library director. Then at the silent auction table Mara had once used to raise enough money for school uniforms and trombone repairs and book fare vouchers without ever writing her own name on the donation sheet. Finish it, I said. Wes frowned. What? Not the pitch. The real night. The part Mara built. So we did. No speeches. No renderings. No more microphones. Just cider. Pie. Scholarship envelopes pulled from the copies Nora had safeguarded. The library director saying a few shaky words about reading as shelter. The quartet playing anyway because one of the churchwomen told them grief should not get to claim another evening if it could be helped. People staying because leaving felt too abrupt after the truth had finally arrived in full light. By 10:15 the barn no longer felt like a crime scene. Not entirely. That part would take longer. But it did feel like Rowan Hill again. Messy. Cold at the door. Warm near the cider urns. Run by people who actually understood the weight of what had nearly been taken. At the very end, when only the staff, Lydia, Nora, Elise, and a few stubborn old friends remained, I carried Mara's recipe box back to the office and set it on her old desk. Then I looked out the window across the lantern path. For the first time in weeks, nobody was narrating me out of my own life. That is a quieter victory than people imagine. But it is a real one. And it is often the one that lets the rest finally begin. That night after the last car left, and the lanterns were cold, the farm became small again. No investors. No string quartet. No borrowed city perfume. Just the people who actually belonged to the aftermath. Wes stacked chairs. Danny swept broken glass from where one of the side lanterns had gone down when the deputies moved in. Lydia took the final copies of the evidence to Valerie's car. Nora boxed the scholarship envelopes as if keeping them tidy might itself be an act of moral repair. Elise sat in the office with a blanket around her shoulders and stared at nothing. I drove to Nora's just after 11 to get Luke. He was not asleep. Of course not. 9-year-olds always know more than adults think. Sometimes not the facts. But the pressure. The wrongness. The shape of danger in other people's voices. He sat at Nora's kitchen table in striped pajamas, drawing on the back of one of her junk mail circulars. A tractor, a dog, 3 stick people, and a barn with every single lantern around it colored in yellow. When he looked up and saw me, he did not ask where his mother was first. He asked, "Did the bad thing happen yet?" I sat down across from him. "Yes." He nodded like a child hearing a weather report that matches what he already saw through the window. "Is Mom okay?" "She is alive. She is with Lydia and Nora for a little while longer." "Is Gavin gone?" "Yes." Another nod. Then he asked the question that mattered most to children in the first minute after adults implode. "Am I sleeping at the farm?" "Yes." That got the first visible release out of him all evening. He climbed off the chair, came around the table, and leaned against my side without asking. Not a dramatic hug. Just the quiet, full weight of a child who needs to know one thing in the world is currently holding. On the drive home he asked almost nothing. Halfway there he said, "Grandma would have hated the screen. She would have. And she would have liked the handcuffs." I actually laughed then. "Yes," I said. "I think she would have." When we got back to the house, I made him toast because toast is the universal late-night food for children and exhausted men in Pennsylvania. He sat at the counter in his socks and watched me butter it. "Grandpa." "Yeah." "Did you save the farm?" I put the plate in front of him. "Tonight I did." He considered that answer. Then he nodded, as if saving something for one night made perfect sense and was enough for now. He slept in the pie room again. Door open. Hall light on. The dog on the rug outside like a guard nobody had officially assigned but who had appointed himself anyway. I sat up with coffee until 2 in the morning, filling out my statement for Valerie and trying not to mistake action for relief. That is one of the quieter disappointments of justice. The truth comes out and the body still does not unclench right away. You do not feel victorious so much as tired in new directions. At 8 the next morning the Gettysburg paper ran the story online. Founders Lantern Night disrupted by fraud allegations at Rowan Hill Orchard. Scholarship funds, sedative claims, and development dispute under county review. By noon it had grown legs. State agriculture blog. Local television website. 2 Facebook groups run by women who treat every public event like a blood sport with casseroles. People called. Texted. Drove by too slowly. Some offered help. Some offered curiosity disguised as concern. A few offered the special kind of pity reserved for men who get publicly replaced and then publicly vindicated before breakfast. Wes took over the phone from 10 to 2 and filtered the calls into 3 piles. Useful. Useless. And I will personally throw this one into the pond. I let him. Valerie returned by midday with a clear update. Gavin had spent the night in county holding. Miranda had retained counsel before dawn. The bank had frozen movement on the disputed accounts. The lender from York had produced enough communications overnight to protect his own position, which meant he had also produced enough to hang Gavin twice if needed. And most interesting of all, Miranda had not decided loyalty was the hill she wanted to die on. "Self-preservation is the most cooperative witness in this country," Valerie said. By the time she left, we knew 3 additional things. First, Gavin had written to Miranda 6 weeks earlier that Elise was still useful for founder optics but no longer strategic. Second, he had referred to me in an email as a tired widower with ceremonial value and declining resistance. Third, he had outlined a phased separation plan in which Elise would receive emotional relocation support after the bridge funding closed and Luke was moved to boarding school. There is a point in every betrayal where explanation dies and inventory begins. We were in inventory now. Elise came to the house that afternoon carrying 1 overnight bag and a legal pad. She had not slept. Her eyes looked bruised from the inside. Luke was out in the lower yard with Wes learning how to change the spark plug in the old four-wheeler because practical tasks are medicine for frightened boys when handled by decent men. Elise stood in the kitchen and listened while Lydia explained the next steps. Cooperation agreement. Voluntary surrender of devices. Full access to home records. Temporary separation from Gavin. Potential charges still on the table because her role was real, but early truth would matter. Temporary custody arrangement if she agreed Luke should stay at the farm for a few days until the county sorted the edges. She agreed to all of it before Lydia finished the page. That told me everything about how much of the marriage she had already watched rot overnight. Then Lydia slid one more paper across. Temporary caregiving authorization placing Luke primarily with me for the immediate review period. Elise signed too fast. I noticed because I noticed things now. After Lydia left, Elise stayed at the table staring at the signature line like it had been written by somebody else. I always thought, she said, that if I got in trouble it would be because I was weak. Not because I helped a man build a whole fiction and then let him use my son to make it efficient. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Set one in front of her. Left mine untouched. Weakness is rarely private for long, I said. It recruits. She laughed once. Ugly sound. Mom would hate how much that sounds like her. Yes. Dad? I waited. If I cooperate fully, are you going to ask them to spare me? There was no safe answer. Only honest ranges. I'm going to ask them to tell the truth about your part, I said. And I'm going to ask them to tell the truth about your son needing his mother. Those are not the same thing as asking them to spare you. She nodded slowly. That's fair. No. It was not fair. Fair would have been a life in which she chose differently 3 years earlier. But it was accurate, and by then accuracy had become our only reliable currency. The county social worker came that evening and spent an hour in our sitting room with Luke and a basket of crayons Mara used to keep for school to her children. She had a kind face and the exhausted patience of somebody who had spent too many years explaining adult damage in child-sized language. Luke told her exactly 4 things that mattered. Gavin said children got simpler at boarding school. Mom used to hide letters and tea. For peace. Grandma said slippery people never say sorry first. And Grandpa asks questions even when people hate it. I nearly cried when I heard that last one through the half-open doorway. Because for months I had been thinking my questions were what made me difficult. And there was my grandson quietly naming them as the thing that kept him from going entirely under. That night Valerie called again. Gavin had asked for a lawyer and then, when told Miranda was cooperating, had pivoted instantly to claiming he was the true victim of a mentally unstable family and an emotionally compromised founder who could not handle change. Valerie sounded almost amused. The problem with men like him, she said, is that they cannot imagine the room changing without calling it corruption. He still thinks if he finds the right version of your grief, somebody will hand the narrative back. Will they? No. That helped more than I expected. The next morning I took Luke to school from the farm. He wanted to go. That surprised me. I asked if he was sure. He said, if I stay home everybody will stare more tomorrow. 9 years old and already understanding public gaze like a small politician. That made me sadder than almost anything else. At drop-off he held my hand an extra second and said, if people ask, can I say the adults are figuring out how not to be weird? Yes. He nodded. Satisfied. Then he added, because that's true. It was. When I got back to the house, I found Elise in the pantry again. Always the pantry. It had become the room where our family met truth because that was where the flour bin had kept it. She was holding one of Mara's recipe cards. Apple butter this time. On the back, in tiny pencil, Mara had written, if Elise ever comes back ashamed, feed her first. Shame makes people either lie or faint. Elise laughed through tears when she read it to me. She knew me too well. She did. She trusted me too little. I did not correct her. Because trust is not a permanent family asset. It is a living thing. It can be thinned, neglected, traded, weaponized. And sometimes the dead know the living better than the living know themselves. I made grilled cheese for lunch because Mara's note had given an instruction and I had learned by then that ignoring my wife's posthumous directions was not a strategy with a history of success. Elise ate half the sandwich and then said, I want to tell Luke myself. Tell him what? The part that matters. That I lied. That Gavin was wrong. That he's not going anywhere. I thought about that. Not today. She nodded. Did not argue. That was growth. Or maybe just depletion. Either way, I took it. The county filed the first protective orders that afternoon. No access by Gavin to the house. No access to Luke. No access to farm accounts. No communication through third parties except counsel. Protective freeze on scholarship-related funds. Emergency hold on the development note. One by one, the little false inevitabilities he had built started getting nailed shut. There is a satisfaction in paperwork when paperwork is finally pointed in the right direction. I would be lying if I said otherwise. But the revenge was not in the forms. The revenge was in timing. Gavin had wanted the room to watch me bless my own erasure. Instead, the room watched the state explain his plan back to him, while the barn still smelled like cider and pie. That mattered to me more than prison did. More than headlines. More than losing him publicly. He wanted legitimacy. I wanted him denied it in front of witnesses. And he got exactly that. 3 days after Lantern Night, Tom drove me down to county holding for a formal identification of records recovered from Gavin's office and car. I did not want to go. Then I decided I did. He looked smaller in county gray. Not sorry. Smaller. The arrogance had not vanished exactly. But without audience, cuff links, or investor timing, it had less architecture to stand up in. He saw me through the glass and smiled again. Incredible, really. Some men would grin at their own sentencing if they thought it let them avoid self-knowledge for one more hour. You enjoying the spectacle? He asked through the phone. No. He tipped his head. That's disappointing. I always figured you'd need moral theater to get through this. He still thought words could put him above consequence. I'm here for the files, I said. He shrugged. You know the farm still needed me. No. It did. You built something that only survives if somebody modernizes it beyond your nostalgia. Elise knew that. Half your workers knew that. You just like villains because villains make aging feel less like irrelevance. That line might have worked on me 2 weeks earlier. Not now. I said. A modern man would know the difference between transition and drugging a widower. His jaw tightened for the first time. Everybody takes something to sleep. I hung up then. There was nothing else in him worth hearing. On the drive back, Tom said, You know he'll keep trying to intellectualize the cage around him. I know. That doesn't mean a jury will buy tickets. No. It didn't. By the end of the first week after Lantern Night, Luke had already developed a new habit. Every afternoon when the mail truck came, he would run to the porch, gather every envelope in both arms, and bring them straight to the kitchen table where he laid them out by name. Not sorted by size. Not by urgency. By rightful owner. Grandpa. Nora. Lydia. Wes. Me. Then he would look up and say, Mail belongs to the people whose names are on it. The first time he did it, I had to turn away and busy myself with the coffee grinder because my eyes went hot. That, more than the charges and the freezes and the newspaper coverage, was how I knew the revenge had already started working at the deepest level. The lie was leaving our gestures. No one was hiding letters anymore. The county moved faster than I expected and slower than I wanted. That, Valerie said, was how serious cases usually felt when you were stuck inside them. By the second week after Lantern Night, the broad outlines were formal. Gavin faced charges related to financial fraud, theft from charitable funds, elder exploitation, document tampering, and unlawful administration of a sedating substance in furtherance of financial gain. Miranda was negotiating cooperation hard enough to leave fingerprints on the carpet. The bank had officially withdrawn support from the development note and started its own internal compliance review, which meant Sandra Hoke stopped sounding concerned and started sounding lawyered. The Preservation Board filed notice against any hospitality conversion pending the fraud investigation. And Rowan Hill, for the first time in months, began to breathe without somebody else's future trying to sit on its chest. I should tell you that victory felt cleaner than it did. But that would be a lie, and lies are what started all of this. In reality, the farm looked exhausted. The barn still needed paint. The heater in the bottling room still coughed every morning before deciding whether to work. The cider line had been over-ordered in one area and under-maintained in another. 2 vendors had to be talked down from panic because Gavin had promised them expansion volumes we were never going to hit. And the scholarship fund, though now protected, had holes in it deep enough to make Mara's library director cry in my office twice. Justice does not harvest apples. Somebody still has to do the work after the handcuffs. So we worked. Wes took the pruning cruise through the South Rows. Danny learned fast enough to justify his questions. Pete rebuilt the tasting bar shelves Gavin had nearly had stripped for. Concept simplification. Nora sat in the office twice a week and became a one-woman anti-fraud statute in wool cardigans. Mira cleaned the books with the quiet concentration of a woman who regarded deceptive bookkeeping as a personal insult. And I, 71 years old, grieving, furious, and more tired than I had ever been after any harvest of my life, started learning how to run my own farm again without assuming family meant safety. That was one of the larger humiliations. Not that Gavin had lied. That I had let proximity feel like proof of loyalty. Elise rented a short-term furnished apartment in town with Lydia's help and a slice of the savings she still legally controlled. She was not arrested immediately, partly because Valerie wanted her cooperation intact and partly because Elise had moved faster than most guilty people do once the lie broke open. Full device surrender. Full records. Full testimony. No contact with Gavin except through counsel. Temporary agreement for Luke to stay primarily with me during the school week while she worked through the county review. The first weekend she took Luke for 6 supervised hours at Nora's house. When they came back, he was quiet in the way children get when they have touched a person they still love and not yet figured out what loving them now is going to cost. That night he stood at the sink beside me while I peeled potatoes and asked, "Can people be your mom and also the reason you feel weird in your stomach?" I set the peeler down. "Yes." "Forever?" "No." He thought about that. "Why not?" "Because people change if they want to. And if they don't, you change what rooms they get to stand in." He nodded like that made obvious sense. Then he said, "Grandma would say stomach weird is information." She would. He helped me mash potatoes after that, and did not ask anything else. Valerie met with me a few days later in her office to discuss police structure. Government offices all smell like old paper, copier heat, and coffee somebody forgot to drink at the right time. Hers was no exception. Framed certificates. Stacks of binders. One family photo turned face down on the credenza because, I suspect, she preferred not to let defendants imagine softness where they had not earned it. She put 2 folders on the desk. One labeled Gavin. One labeled Elise. "You get some input," she said. "Not final authority, but real input. So I want to hear what outcome you think serves justice, not just appetite." That was Valerie. She always made you feel the difference between hunger and principle. She opened Gavin's file first. The case against him was strong and getting stronger. Miranda had turned fully once she saw the email trail would not spare her. The lender from York had handed over bridge correspondence. The bank, desperate to prove institutional innocence, had produced call logs and internal notes, showing Gavin repeatedly pushed the decline narrative to accelerate sensitivity-based handling. And the thermos issue, while not spectacular enough for television, read terribly in print once attached to a financial motive. "What does he want?" I asked. "He wants to negotiate as if he is still the smartest man in the room," Valerie said. "Which is never a great opening position in my office." I almost smiled. "And Elise?" Valerie opened the second folder. "Accessory exposure. Obstruction concerns. Mail interception. Participation in transfers. Child narrative reinforcement. On the other side, immediate cooperation, surrender of records, corroboration of manipulation, willingness to testify, and a minor child who still needs a mother." There it was. The whole thing. Punish the crime. Preserve the child. Name the harm without pretending motherhood cancels it. "What do you want me to say?" I asked. "The truth," she said. Would prison for Elise serve you or only satisfy the part of you still standing in that dining room at the memorial supper? I looked out the office window toward the parking lot where the county cars sat in slanting spring rain. Then I said it plainly. I want Gavin broken in every way the law allows. Not beaten. Not pitted. Broken. He wanted legitimacy more than money. He wanted the right to tell the town he had outgrown me. I want a record that follows him into every polished room for the rest of his life. Valerie wrote something down. And Elise. I took longer. Finally I said, I want consequences she cannot wriggle out of by crying. I want the scholarship money repaid. I want a public apology to the workers, the library, and the town she helped mislead. I want supervised rebuilding with Luke based on truth, not sentiment. And I want her to understand that the farm is not a stage for her redemption. Redemption, if she gets any, happens elsewhere and slower. Valerie nodded. That, she said, is the first reasonable thing anyone has asked me for all month. Gavin took the deal only after Valerie showed him how much Miranda had already given them. 3 years minimum state time if he fought and lost, probably more once the charitable fund angle and elder exploitation pattern were presented together. A lesser but still brutal path if he pled to primary counts, provided full restitution, surrendered all claims, and accepted a permanent fraud conviction on his record. He tried to posture right up to the edge of the signature line. Lydia later told me he spent 20 minutes lecturing Valerie about the difference between visionary restructuring and provincial panic. Apparently Valerie let him finish and then asked whether he wanted to explain that theory to a jury using the phrase old men do not win long games against paperwork as Exhibit 7. He signed. The restitution package was the part one cared about most after the conviction itself. Scholarship fund restored in full. Operating account recovery through liquidated investments and Miranda settlement. No claim on Rowan Hill, its name, or any affiliated brand material. No access to Luke. No contact with me except through final restitution channels. No return to the property for any reason. When Valerie told me that last one, something in my chest loosened I had not known was still clamped. Never again. Do not underestimate the peace in those 2 words. Elise's agreement came a week later. No prison if she met every condition. Probation. Financial disclosure. Community service to the library fund she helped damage. Mandatory counseling. A recorded public statement of responsibility. No unsupervised influence over Luke until the Family Review Board cleared it. And most important to me, no language anywhere in the deal suggesting she had acted purely to protect me. Valerie insisted on that point herself. Help does not hide letters in flower bins, she said. We are not going to let good wording dress this up after the fact. The public apology happened in the Orchard barn on a Thursday afternoon with only the people who deserved to hear it. Wes. Danny. Pete. The library director. 2 churchwomen from the scholarship committee. Nora. Lydia. Me. And Elise standing by the old press with the printed page in her trembling hands. The barn smelled like wood dust and old cider. No lanterns. No music. No quarter for performance. She started reading too fast. Lydia stopped her. Again, she said. Slower. If you rush, you're still hiding. Elise tried again. This time she said what mattered. That she hid my letters. That she let sedating tea become routine. That she moved scholarship money knowing it was wrong. That she repeated a story about my instability to make difficult choices look caring. That she let Gavin translate urgency into morality because she was afraid and wanted the fear to be somebody else's plan. Then she looked at Wes. I also let the staff think change had your blessing when I knew it didn't. Wes folded his arms and said, Yes, you did. No comfort. No cruelty. Just fact. She turned to the library director. I let my mother's scholarship fund become leverage. The library director cried quietly while nodding because some losses are too specific to dramatize. Finally Elise looked at me. I used your grief to make you easier to handle. That line was the true apology. Everything before it had been detail. That was the spine. And because Luke was not in the room, Because the workers deserved honesty. Because Mara deserved it too, I answered in front of everyone. Yes. You did. No speech. No absolution. No grand reconciliation music from the heavens. Just truth acknowledged where it had first been denied. Afterward, Elise asked if I could ever forgive her. I told her the same thing I had been circling for weeks. Forgiveness is too soft a word for what comes next. What comes next is whether you become trustworthy enough that the question changes shape. She cried again. Less dramatically this time. More like a person who finally understands that some roads back are built from repeated dull choices, not one emotional collapse. The farm changed after that. Not romantically. Not into some shining miracle where all damage becomes wisdom and everybody bakes more. It changed through ledgers. Locks. Schedules. Questions asked twice. Inventory checked by 2 people instead of 1. Bank alerts on my phone. Nora reading everything with a red pen before I signed it. Luke announcing the mail. Wes refusing to let any consultant walk the property without muddy boots. And yes, it changed in the soil too. We cancelled every development concept Gavin had ever floated. No cabins. No tasting terrace on the ridge. No Mara experience. No view corridors cut through old Goldens for city photographs. Instead, we put money into what should have been done 2 years earlier. Drainage on the lower block. New netting on the cherry rows. Actual repairs on the cider barn roof. A modest online store that sold apples and preserves instead of fantasies. We got smaller on purpose. That was the surprising part. Gavin always talked as though survival meant becoming larger, shinier, more layered, more purchasable. What actually saved Rowan Hill was the opposite. We cut the nonsense out. Stopped pretending the farm needed to become a destination for people who wanted to spend money near dirt without respecting what dirt requires. That summer, for the first time in years, the books made moral sense before they made exciting sense. Mira called that a rare and beautiful accounting condition. Luke called it not weird. I preferred his term. One afternoon in June he came in from the lower rows with juice down his chin and one trouser leg muddy to the knee and said, "Grandpa, can I have a real job at the farm when I'm 10? You're 9. I know. I'm planning." Mara would have loved that. I told him yes, but only if he learned 3 things first. What are they? How to ask questions. How to tell when somebody's helping you versus organizing you. And how to read the mail before you panic. He considered that carefully. Then he nodded. Okay. But the male one is kind of your class too. He was right. Annoyingly, gloriously right. That July, after the first hearing closed Gavin's plea, I got something I had not expected. A letter from Miranda Easton. Not through counsel. Not exactly. Her lawyer had approved the content, Lydia verified the channel, and Valerie raised no objection. Inside was a cashier's check completing her share of the restitution and a 1-page note that began. Mr. Rowan, I am not writing to ask for mercy. I do not deserve it. I am writing because you should know Gavin told me for months that your daughter understood she was transitional, and that your farm was already half sold in spirit if not in paperwork. That lie made it easier for me to believe my own involvement was commercial rather than predatory. It was neither. It was rotten. I am sorry for my part in it. I read the note twice and then burned it in the kitchen stove. Not because I doubted it. Because some apologies are records and some are fuel. That one was fuel. Elise asked later whether Miranda had written. I told her yes. Did you read it? Yes. What did it say? That your husband told women whatever version of reality let him keep moving. She nodded once and said, that sounds right. By August, Luke had started sleeping with the hall light off again. You may think that is a small detail. It is not. Children mark safety in light switches, footsteps, kitchen tones, where adults stand when angry, whether doors close softly or hard. The big headlines happen to us. The nervous system happens underneath. The first night he turned the hall light off by himself, I stood at the foot of the stairs longer than necessary, pretending to inspect the smoke alarm just because I wanted to witness the ordinary miracle of it. That same month, Elise began supervised work at the public library as part of her service requirement. The library director did not make it easy on her. Good. She sorted donations, repaired torn paperbacks, and spent 2 Saturdays setting up the children's reading corner funded partly by the very scholarship money she had helped damage. Once, Luke and I came in for a book and saw her kneeling on the floor taping a paper oak tree to the wall while 3 children dictated where the acorns should go. She looked up. Saw us. Did not smile as if a smile were owed. Just nodded once. Later Luke asked, "Is Mom in trouble or helping?" I said, "Both." He thought about that. Then he said, "That feels honest." Yes. It did. And honesty, after a season like ours, felt better than comfort most days. Gavin's sentencing happened in September under fluorescent lights that made every expensive shirt look cheap. He had been out on restricted release for the plea phase because Valerie wanted the restitution process completed cleanly and because, in fairness, county jails are not built around my preferred order of events. But by September the money was back, the scholarship fund restored, the plea accepted, and the last of the cooperating witnesses processed into the machinery of consequence. So there we were. Judge Holloway on the bench. Valerie at one table. Lydia beside me. Gavin in a navy suit that fit badly now because county stress and private arrogance do not tailor the same. His lawyer speaking in tones of productive regret. Elise not in the room by her own choice. Luke at school where he belonged. I had written an impact statement 3 times. The first version was too angry. The second too literary. The third Mara would have approved because it told the truth without dressing itself up. When the judge asked whether I wished to speak, I stood and read it. I said Gavin had not merely tried to take land. Land can be defended with fences, lawyers, and weather. He had tried to take authorship. He had tried to narrate me into decline so that other people would thank him, while he stripped my wife's name, my daughter's fear, my grandson's trust, and my own grief for usable parts. I said the most lasting injury was not financial. It was domestic. He had turned ordinary objects into instruments. Tea. Mail. School decisions. Fundraising. The language of concern. He had made home administration feel unsafe. I said there are crimes that steal money and crimes that train a family to doubt its own senses. He had done both. Then I read the last line. Your Honor, prison will not restore the seasons he spent trying to convert my wife's orchard into an atmosphere package. It will not give my grandson back the version of childhood in which adults do not speak of children as logistics. But it may at least do this. It may make one polished man spend a few years in a room where he cannot call theft vision and expect applause. The courtroom was quiet after that in a better way than the memorial supper had been quiet. Not stunned. Clear. The judge sentenced him within the plea range. Not the maximum. Enough. State time. Restitution enforcement. Fraud conviction permanent. Professional reporting obligations. No contact orders extended. No business authority over charitable funds for longer than he would likely still want to be alive. He looked at me once on the way out. No smile this time. Nothing left polished enough to produce one. Just contempt and disbelief and the particular blankness of a man finally forced to live in a story he did not get to write. That was enough for me. The revenge had never been the jail itself. It was that he lost control of the room. Then the record. Then the future. After sentencing, Valerie walked with me down the courthouse steps into a daze so clear it looked professionally cleaned. You feel better? She asked. No. She nodded. Good. Better would imply the event matched the loss. We stood there a minute. Then she said, but maybe you feel safer. I thought about the mail on my kitchen table. About Luke turning the hall light off. About Nora's red pen. About the scholarship checks already reissued. About Elise taping children's paper oak leaves to the library wall instead of translating her husband's crimes into management language. Yes, I said. I do. That was the right word. Not healed. Safer. The farm entered its first honest harvest after that. If you have never worked an orchard, you may think legal victory would overshadow fruit. It doesn't. Apples do not care about your courtroom catharsis. They split or sweeten according to weather, thinning, soil, and luck. That saved me, I think. Because while the county finished its paperwork and town rumor found new prey, the trees kept requiring things that were real. Pick now. Wait 2 days. Watch that block for scab. Fix the pressure line. Move the bins before the storm. Taste this row again. Do not trust the color on the east side. Ask the paper? I put Luke on sticker duty for the cider club boxes every Saturday. He took it with a seriousness usually reserved for border control. Straight, he would say if I set one even slightly crooked. Grandma would not let that pass. No. She would not. By October he had a real farm notebook. Green cover. Name written on the front. Inside he recorded weather, worm sightings, whether the mule tape had snagged during irrigation repair, and the exact count of envelopes delivered each day. One rainy Tuesday he held the notebook up to me and said, "I think records are kind of feelings that sit still." That is the sort of sentence that makes a man briefly believe language might survive us better than blood does. I wrote it down later in Mara's recipe box because some thoughts deserve not to be lost. Elisa's progress came slower. As it should have. At first Luke tolerated her in intervals. Library visits. Short dinners at the farm with me nearby. Walks to the pond where he would mostly speak to the ducks and let her match his pace. Once, after she corrected the way he folded the fishing net, he looked at her and said, "Mom, when you sound like Gavin, I stop hearing the rest." That nearly folded her in half. But to her credit, she did not defend herself. She crouched to his eye level and said, "Then I need to sound different." That was the best thing she could have said. Change is often less glamorous than people imagine. Less about breakthroughs. More about not taking the bait of your old habits when a child hands them back to you by name. The county review board cleared her for longer unsupervised time by Christmas. Not overnight yet. Long afternoons. Then whole Saturdays. She never pushed. That mattered more than any therapy sentence she could have repeated to me. Around then, Sandra Hoke from the bank came to the farm in person. I expected paperwork. Maybe an apology shaped like corporate risk management. Instead, she stood in my kitchen holding a fruit basket that looked expensive enough to be insulting and said, "I should have questioned the sensitivity notes earlier." I let that sit. She continued, "I have worked with your family 20 years. I knew what grief looked like. I also knew what financial urgency sounded like. I let his language make me feel compassionate when I should have felt cautious. I'm sorry." It was not a perfect apology. Too much bank in it. Too much training. But it was still truer than most. I told her to keep the fruit and bring better lending terms for working farms next season if she wanted to do something useful. 3 weeks later she did. Apparently remorse can occasionally produce decent financing. By January, snow had simplified the whole world again. Rows to lines. Roads to tracks. Roofs to weight. Luke and I spent one Saturday morning carrying wood from the shed while the dog launched himself into snowbanks with more optimism than skill. Around noon the mail truck came and Luke ran out in his boots, came back with the envelopes, laid them in their proper names on the table, then frowned. "Grandpa." "What?" "There's one for Mom." "Yes." "She should open it." "Yes." He stood there another second. Then he said, "I'm glad no one has to hide this one." So was I. That evening Elise came for stew and stayed to help Nora label scholarship letters. We were all at the kitchen table. Steam on the windows. The dog under Luke's chair. Snow light outside. Mara used to say a family can survive almost anything except bad table habits and repeated dishonesty. We had mostly fixed the second. The first remained under active review. At one point Luke asked if he could see the trust papers when he was older. "Why?" I asked. "So nobody can call them emotional symbolism," he said. Nora laughed so hard she had to take off her glasses. That was when I realized how much adult language the boy had survived and how strangely well he had learned to sort through it. In early spring, a full year after the memorial supper, the library held its first reading festival funded entirely by the restored scholarship account and a matching donation from the Orchard's spring cider release. They asked if I would say a few words. I almost refused. Then I remembered that refusing every microphone forever is just another way of letting the wrong moment define your relationship to public speech. So I went. The event was in the elementary school gym with folding chairs, paper banners, and little cardboard apples painted by second graders. Not a glamorous room. My favorite kind. The librarian thanked Mara. The principal thanked the town. 3 children read paragraphs about their favorite books, and one of them forgot the middle and calmly improvised around it with more grace than most adults at a county hearing. Then Elise stepped up. Not because anyone required it. Because she asked? She said only this. My mother believed books belonged in the hands of children, not behind counters they were ashamed to approach. I helped damage the fund she built for that. I am still repaying more than money. Thank you for letting this room exist anyway. Then she stepped back without waiting for forgiveness to do the work of character. That was the first time I thought she might actually survive herself. A week later, Luke slept over at her apartment for the first time since the arrests. Not because a judge ordered it. Because he asked? I spent half the evening pacing. Then half the night pretending I was not waiting for the phone to ring. It never did. In the morning he came back to the farm and said, Mom doesn't keep tea in anything with a lid now. I nodded. That probably makes sense. And she showed me all the mail before breakfast. Good. That too. He hesitated. Then he added, It was still a little weird. Yes, I said. Probably will be for a while. He thought about that. Then, very solemnly, he said, But it wasn't secret weird. That was enough. More than enough. If you are waiting for some cinematic moment where everything stitched itself closed, this is where I disappoint you. Healing did not arrive like a verdict. It came in smaller, almost stupid things. Luke no longer checking the hall before speaking freely. Elise asking questions before making plans. Nora leaving my signatures alone because there was nothing left to double verify that week. Wes once again complaining about dear pressure instead of fraud. The scholarship kids sending thank you cards to the Orchard instead of the county evidence locker. And yes, it came in one last scene with Mara's recipe box. In late April, almost 13 months after the memorial supper, Luke and I were in the kitchen making his grandmother's apple slab pie for the Blossom Crew lunch. He had flour on his cheek. I had cinnamon in the seam of my thumb. The windows were open because the day had turned warm enough to make the house smell like thawed earth and yeast. Luke reached for the red recipe box, opened it, and pulled out the French apple pie card. Then he stopped. There's writing on the back. I smiled. Yes. He turned it over and read slowly. Not the old notes about ledgers and leverage. I had added one of my own beneath Mara's pencil in dark blue ink a few nights earlier. Ask the paper. Trust the child who notices. Do not let pretty people rename your life. And if you ever feel slippery truth under your feet, go to the flour bin first. Luke read it twice. Then he looked up. Did you write the last part? Yes. Good addition. That is when I laughed. Not the bitter kind. Not the courtroom kind. Not the laugh that keeps you from collapsing. A real laugh. Mine. Unborrowed. Luke grinned. Outside the kitchen window, the first white bloom had started to show on the lower rows. And for the first time since Mara died, the farm did not feel like something I was defending from within the ruins of myself. It felt like a place again. Not innocent. Not untouched. But returned enough to breathe. That mattered more than revenge. Maybe revenge was just the road that got us there. I still think about the memorial supper sometimes. About the fireplace. The pie on the sideboard. Elise standing up to narrate my disappearance before the room had any reason to doubt her. Luke under the tablecloth whispering like a child who had already learned the acoustics of adult danger. If he had not spoken, Gavin might have gotten months more. Maybe a year. Maybe enough to bankrupt the farm, move Luke out of state, and turn Mara into a themed hospitality package with a website full of string lights and lies. But he did speak. A child noticed. A dead woman left notes. A father finally asked the paper instead of the people benefiting from his confusion. And a polished man lost the room he thought belonged to him. That is the version I keep. Not the cuffs. Not the newspaper. Not the sentence. That. A boy telling the truth at the exact moment the adults around him had decided truth was too inconvenient to keep alive. I used to think revenge was the dramatic part. The reveal. The arrest. The public collapse. Now I think revenge, at least the useful kind, is smaller and more exact. It is making liars live inside the record they built for someone else. It is handing a frightened child back a house where mail comes to the table openly. It is forcing stolen money to return to books and band uniforms. It is taking a room designed for your humiliation and filling it with evidence instead. And after all that, it is this. One spring evening the year after Lantern Night, Luke stood at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes in his hands. The windows were open. The dog was asleep by the radiator. Mara's pie cooled on the rack. Elise was due in 20 minutes to take him to the library festival. I was checking the cider club labels for the weekend pickup. Luke laid the envelopes out one by one. Grandpa. Mom. Nora. Me. Then he added a fifth. To the Rowan Hill Memorial Library Fund. He looked at the names. Looked at me. And said very matter-of-fact, "Nobody has to earn their own mail anymore." That was the moment I had to turn away and pretend the pie needed checking. Because some endings are too clean to stare at directly. And because after everything that had been hidden, intercepted, sweetened, translated, rushed, and renamed, the most honest image left was still a child at a kitchen table, putting the right things in front of the right people, and expecting the house to deserve that trust. This whole story began with a whisper under a tablecloth. It ended with the mail in plain view.